We're going to call this meeting to order at 1. It is Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. This is our standard superintendent workshop. We are located in the Joe N. Idolette Teacher Education Center, located at 6500 57th Street, Vero Beach, 32967. And I say that because we are open if individuals would like to come in and sit with us during the meeting and be present and listen throughout the workshop. At this time, we do have 4 board members that are present, and we have Mrs. Rosario that will be joining us on Teams today. And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Moore for a series of presentations today, and welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hope everyone enjoyed their extended weekend, Labor Day weekend, had the opportunity to relax, connect with your families, and rejuvenate as we return for the 11th day of school. Today we have a number of items that cabinet members will be presenting. I will set up those items and then turn it over to the respective cabinet members for their presentations. We'll begin with Mr. Fagan as he sips his coffee. He'll be providing overview on 4 items. Then we will move to Ms. Dampier, who will have 2 items, the school health services plan as well as the statewide assessment calendar. Mr. Meyer will have a number of renewal contracts, some very interesting. And then we will end with Mr. Bass looking at our 5-year capital plan, as well as assessment review. That is Mr. Bass as well. The assessment and review agreements for access control at various schools. So looking forward to those items. In order to facilitate this conversation at the conclusion of each presentation of each item, the cabinet as well as myself will take any questions or feedback or concerns the board may have with each presented item. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Fagan for the first item, which is the agreement for Sebastian River Senior High School restroom renovation. Mr. Fagan.
Thank you, Soup, through the chair. The first item we have is the renovation of the restrooms at Sebastian River High School. The scope of this work includes the renovation of the male and female restrooms in wings C, F, M, and V. The approximate cost is $599,000. $550,000 is for construction. Approximately $50,000 is for agricultural and engineering fees. The restrooms to be renovated are on the second and the first floor. The process is to renovate 2 restrooms at a time. Therefore, there will be minimum disruption for the students to have access. This is the first renovation since the school was built in 1994. And the estimated completion date is at least by 2021 of May 2021 or earlier, depending upon circumstances.
Okay. Do we have any, Kristen, no comments or anything? Okay.
Okay, moving along to item number 2B is review of health insurance for retirees.
Excuse me, Mrs. Orr. I just have a technology question, I'm sorry, and perhaps Dr. Schiff is also suffering from a similar problem. I'm not able to load the backup documents via Board Docs right now. Is anyone else experiencing that?
Yeah, so I called Mr. McDonald because I'm not sure if my problem is the password that changes and throws you out, so I'm going to have him reset my password, and then I'll know if it's that or if that's just...
Mine just loaded, it's extraordinarily slow today, so
Okay.
for whatever reason. Thank you.
Moving on to item B, review of health insurance for retirees. As the board knows, we have within our health insurance plan, we have active employees and retirees employees. There's approximately 130, 140 retirees that are currently on our plan. We've put together an option for them. It is voluntary. It is not mandatory. This option will allow them to move from our plan to a Florida Blue plan. This option will allow them to have one of the largest providers in Florida with over 20,000 physicians. They'll have available supplemental coverage for dental, vision, and hearing. They even get a subscription to the Silver Sneaker Gym subscription. The major benefit to the retirees is currently, if you are a retired single only retiree, you could save approximately $3,100 a year. If you are a retiree with a spouse, you could save upward to $5,300 a year as the difference between our cost of premiums versus Florida Blue. Now, of course, When you look at this, that's about 100 some odd, 115 retirees, I believe, 139 members. That's an annual savings to those individuals as a group of over $400,000 that they get to put money in their pocket. There are some slight disruptions, as we call them. The first slight disruption is your co-pays. Your co-pays will slightly increase, some from a minimum of $5, some to maybe $150 for your more extensive labs and emergency room visits. However, that is offset by the reduction of the premiums. Network disruption. Currently, there are 31 facilities that are currently being used by the retirees. 28 or 91% are in the Florida Blue Plan. So you have a very small disruption. The disruption does not mean that the provider's not there. It just means the provider that the retiree is using is not one of them. So it's not you won't have coverage, you just have to change. Physicians, 505 physicians were reviewed. 469 are in the plan. So 93% of all physicians, they'll have the same physicians they have today. Ancillary facilities, these are things like laboratory, pharmacy, physical therapy, et cetera. 80 facilities were reviewed, 46 or 57% are in the same plan. Doesn't mean it's not available, just means you have to change. Other medical disruptions, things such like chiropractor, clinical social worker, pharmacy, et cetera. 146 ones are currently being used, 122 in the Florida Blue Plan, or 84%. Big item for this group is prescriptions. We compared 4,437 prescriptions. All but 342 or less than 8% are not in the same plan. Doesn't mean the prescription is not there, it just means the specific one they are using is not. There's an alternative, there could be a generic. There's also an appeal process. If there's a particular drug that you're using and it's not covered, you can go through an appeal process. But once again, this is voluntary, not mandatory. Tentative schedule to present this is to HITEF on 9/9. Then we're going to send out some communication to the retirees in mid-October, and then open enrollment will be late October. Again, it's also not mandatory. If you just choose not to elect this time, you can elect next year. The overall plan is to be able to offer this to all employees, so moving forward at some point in time, it will become the only plan that retirees can use. They will no longer be on the district plan. Any questions?
Mrs. Justice.
Thank you very much. So you've mentioned some minimal disruptions, and I've heard those, and for some people it will be minimal, and for some others it won't, but you've also said it's voluntary. Going forward with any other employees or retirees that come and are able to make a choice, will they be able to choose between the existing plan and switching to Florida Blue?
Through the chair, you mean current employees today? They're with us today?
Who will retire. Mm-hmm.
The ultimate plan is to ultimately have this as only for retirees, to move all retirees off of the school board plan.
Great. And then the other question I have is regarding HITEF. In my history as a board member, things have been brought to the board after going through HITEF and a recommendation being given by HITEF or some input being given, and this is the opposite. Right now, you're discussing this with us, and then it's going to HITEF, correct?
Yes, ma'am, through the chair.
And so just curious about what that process is, if it's changing going forward in this capacity, or if there is some variance as to how new information is vetted throughout the district.
Through the chair, keep in mind, HITEF and the retirees have known about this for probably over 6 months. They know we've been looking at something. It all was the timing at which to advise the board before officially giving a presentation to HITEF.
And is that the way it would be going forward? And perhaps that's a question for Dr. Moore.
Through the chair, and looking at the process or learning the process as we move through last year, I think there are opportunities to use HITAF to inform this board, and for you all as a board to rely on them for recommendations as it captures the work that's being done as we negotiate contract, provide insurance, so it is a comprehensive recommendation moving forward. So the intent would be to work with them to ensure that all members of the organization in which you represent and lead are being heard from, so when a recommendation comes to you, it is a solidified recommendation.
Thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Mrs. Rosario.
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, as was just discussed with the process, Usually, as Mrs. Justice just mentioned, HITEF meets, they provide a recommendation for the board to review, and then the board makes a decision, votes on a particular item moving forward. Since this is in reverse, why do we have to go to HITEF at all? Is it that we're presenting to them what the board has decided at this point as an FYI, or are we presenting to receive more input from them?
Through the chair, HITEF is an advisory council. They are part of the process. Their recommendation and their approval denial of any item brought to them is simply advisory.
Right.
So the timing of when we take it to them versus we bring it to the board, it happened to do with when the information was ready to be presented.
But at this point, I think what I'm asking is, at this point, what is the benefit for us after today to present to them what the board has decided or voted on or agreed to?
Through the chair, this is an item the board doesn't have to approve. This is an item that we're presenting to the community of retirees. HITEF could disapprove it altogether if they believe it is not something that they feel is in the best interest of the retirees. But keep in mind, you have retirees on HITEF as well.
Yeah, but HITEF is a committee. They are a group who advises and they don't decide. They're not the deciding factors.
Through the chair, that is correct.
So what I just heard is that they could not agree to this.
Okay, I
What am
think we all want to speak to this. Do you mind?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So I was just looking over the agenda for tonight again, just to make sure this isn't an item we're going to be voting on tonight, correct?
To the
Okay,
chair,
so
no,
we're
ma'am.
just discussing this. So I like the fact that it's being brought to us first, then you're going to present it to HITEF, and then it may come back to us for a vote, correct?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And I think as we reviewed the item, I thought that was important to have the opportunity to bring the board up to speed. So this is not an action item. This is a presentation to inform the board regarding where staff is. If there's any input or feedback moving forward, then obviously we would be more than willing to receive that.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, just my understanding of the way this process works, which you've just clarified in terms of when it's going to come for a vote. But the point of HITEF is to advise us, to make sure that we work in concert and that we make decisions that are in the best interests of the district and of our employees. So our goal here, I think, is not who makes the decision, it's how do we best work in collaboration with this unit that we've engaged to help us make the best decisions. So in my understanding of it, it's not we make the decision and they live with it. It's we make the decision in collaboration because they are our advisors to make the best decisions possible. So maybe that helps clarify, Mrs. Rosario, about the way the process works between that committee and this board.
No, it does, and I understand their role. I just didn't, with the reversal, this is the first time that we're seeing an item first, or rather in a public forum, so it just threw me a little bit as to what would happen moving forward and what the benefits are of us presenting to them on the other end. So I get it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up? And I think as I understand it, the benefit of this coming to us is that Mr. Fagan is communicating with us, and I think we all had this in board briefing reviews as well, communicating with us an option that the district would like to present. So if we hear about it first, it becomes a dialogue going back and forth. But we now, as the board, have heard about a possibility that Mr. Fagan is presenting to us that will then be presented to HITEF as something that we've reviewed and are asking for their input and their either support or critique on, which to me makes sense.
To the chair.
Am I understanding that correctly?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Is it a follow-up? Because I have a comment. Go ahead.
And I think it's important, and my highlighting the process was just to kind of say thank you, and I should have said it perhaps in a different way. Thank you for this dialogue and opening this up to conversation. When we have seen issues in the past regarding health insurance, the miscommunication with HITEF and with the collaboration with all stakeholders was missing. And when we saw that, we saw conflict. So going forward, this is the best way to do this, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Fahey. I have a couple of questions on this.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, comments. So the goal is to try to save money for our retirees, but then it also help our insurance fund, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
And has Aon looked at this to be able to determine how much in the future, if we have X amount of retirees that switch over into this plan, I'm foreseeing that that's going to drastically help with our premium, I call them premiums still, but with our health insurance fund.
Through the chair, this process and this action would do a twofold item. Number one, being such a small group, the retirees, they're somewhat volatile. One time premiums may exceed claims, and the next year it may be vice versa. Your biggest advantage to this plan, which is not necessarily discussed here because it's not necessarily for the retirees, is your OPEB, other post-employment benefits. You currently have these employees, retirees, on our plan, and then when they do the actuarial study, and you're jumping a little ahead to the AFR, there was a big increase in that cost for the actuarial study. Well, what they do in that study is they calculate how many people do you have employed, what is their ages, and based upon assumption and a model, they will determine how many will retire and elect to stay on our plan, how many are at what age and will elect to stay on our plan, and how many at what age today will not stay on our plan. Well, if this is enacted and all retirees come off, you will see that post-opportunity employment benefit costs go down. So there's another side to this on the financial side that you'll see this liability go down.
So the benefit I see here is looking at it from a financial standpoint, I think it makes perfect sense. So I see the benefit of presenting to us now and then us saying, yes, go present it to HITEF, but that's the feedback I want to hear because sometimes I get bogged down with what looks good financially. I need to hear what am I missing in this. So I look forward to having this come back and hearing what they have to say.
Yes, ma'am. Next item is tonight's meeting, we have an approval item before the board to approve the annual financial report. This is the annual financial report for 2019-20. If you recall from last year, the AFR, Annual Financial Report, consists of two parts. There's a front section, which is called government-wide financials, and a back part, which we call governmental funds. The main difference between these two reports, in order to comply with DOE and accounting rules, is you have to present the financials in two perspectives. The first perspective is basically on an accrual basis, which is where revenues are recognized when earned, not necessarily when received, and expenses are recognized when incurred, not paid. That's a big distinction. That's what a full accrual accounting system is, and that's what you see in the front of your book. The theory of this is you're trying to take the district and compare it to a publicly traded public sector company. The back of the book is what we call governmental funds or individual funds. This is where pretty much all governmental entities use this. This is where revenues are recognized when you get them. Expenditures, not expenses, are recognized when you pay them. A big difference between recognizing an expense and paying a bill. So that's the basic difference between the book in the front and the back. You're trying to compare it to the private sector, and then you're complying with the governmental funds. When you look at the accrual basis, there's two key statements. One is your statement of activities, which is nothing more than your profit and loss. I'm sorry, profit and loss. Net position is on page 14. That's basically a profit and loss statement. Excuse me, that's your asset statement. Sorry, get that back here. Okay? That's your net position report. It's basically a balance sheet. Take all your liabilities, all your expenses, all your potential liabilities such as OPEB, pension, FRS, all your outstanding debt. You bring it all onto the books and you reflect it like a regular publicly traded company. Your next comparison is what we call a statement of,
As we go or at the end? What would you prefer?
We could, probably now would be better, I think.
Okay, I have a question about that particular page. If you look at the bottom of page 15, that's 172 million, right?
yes, ma'am?
Okay, should that number match up to the number on page 7?
No, ma'am, it should match up to your number on page 14.
Okay, so on page 7, at the bottom, our net position, right? There are no titles at the top of that page, so I'm assuming the title is from the page before the previous page coming over?
That really ties back as a summary of page 14.
Page 7 is a summary of page 14? Okay, so in other words, there are no titles at the top, so for what those columns are. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am, I
Okay.
see that.
So when I go down and I kind of know enough to double check, you know, when you've got a column at the bottom, I double check that number against where you have it later on in the book.
Yes, ma'am.
So the question I have is, okay, the 171 that matched, the, 179, okay, all the numbers match except for the one in the second to last column, 172,593.
That is when you take governmental wide and you add your other business type, which is your extended day.
Okay.
Your extended day is on the next page, if you go back to
So we
page-
should take the number on page 15 and add it to the extended day?
And add extended day.
They are very similar. One number is 171.5 and the other one is 172.6. Those are the same two numbers on the bottom of page 15. They match the bottom of page 14, and they also match the bottom of page 7.
Okay, so going back to page 7,
Yes, ma'am.
you're saying that 172,593,
Yes.
that matches what and what again?
172.593.
Because I see
No, ma'am, that is a
172,601.
mistake.
And knowing enough about when people look at books, they go down to the penny, correct?
In governmental accounting, you do. In public sector, you do not.
Okay.
That should be 601.
I was just curious why that's a discrepancy.
That is a typo on that recon. This page right here is a manually created page on number 7 that's supposed to recon the 2 pages. The 2 pages in the back are system generated.
Okay. I just caught that,
Yes.
so I wanted to know.
Very good catch, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Notable highlights for the 2019-20 annual financial report. The net position of the district overall decreased by 7.9 million. If you look on page 2.
Page 2?
Page 2. The very top, and then bullet that says financial highlights. Overall decrease of $7.9 million. The result of this is 3 major factors. Number 1, as you remember this year, we had an increase in FRS benefit rate. Well, also overall, at the end of the year, the state will give us an actuarial report of our future FRS and HIS benefits and payables in the future. That number increased by $5.7 million. When you do governmental-wide expenditures, that basically is an additional expense. It's an additional future expense. OPEB, the other post-employment benefits for having retirees on our health care plan went up by $1.4 million. This was primarily attributed to a decrease in the discount rate, which increases your present value calculations for those claims. You also started the year, or ended the year, with a $2.4 million decrease in fund balance. You put all those things together, then your overall net position went down $7.9 million. Doesn't mean the district is in financial perils, it just means when you reconcile from funds to governmental-wide, it retracts all inflows and all outflows.
Are we still looking at not having to go out for a tan?
As of today, yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. I know you keep saying as of today, so that's a good answer. Thank you.
Can you, I think you said this, but as I was keeping up with you, I may have missed this. The decrease, the net decrease does not affect, did you say that the net decrease does not affect our ratings? Or did you not address that?
Correct, yes, ma'am. The primary point that rating agencies will look at is your fund balance, your revenue stream, and your expenditure stream. This right here is an accounting exercise. They want us to do A, B, and C to reflect D. It's a nice exercise, it shows something, but when a bond agency is looking at you, they want to know what your expenditures are, your revenue, and your ending fund balance. Are you increasing your revenue stream, controlling expenditures, and maintaining that fund balance? Okay. If you look at page 9, oh, sorry, wrong page. Fund balance for the district on page 9 at the top. Fund balance basically maintained on a governmental-wide basis of $46 million. That's a good thing and a bad thing. You didn't decrease, but you didn't increase, so you maintained. Basically, fund balance in general fund went down $2 million. This is a result of transfer from general fund to the health insurance fund, that last final settlement. That means that money moved to health care versus staying in general fund.
If you could not refer to it as a last final settlement, it was not a last final
Okay.
settlement.
A
It
transfer,
was-
excuse me, pardon.
No, it's fine, it's just important to not rewrite history.
Okay.
Thank you.
There were some other changes between the funds, but basically you maintain your fund balance overall for governmental funds, government-wide as 46 million. Revenues at the middle of page 9, your revenues basically were flat, 154 million to 154 million. Taxes increased by about $2 million, and other financing sources decreased $2 million. Expenditures for the district, government-wide, increased by approximately $3.4 million. Your biggest increase was in salaries and benefits, which is approximately $5.3 million. Remember,
I'm sorry, was in what? I didn't hear you.
salaries and benefits.
Thank you.
Of $5.3 million. This was for 1920.
May I ask? So our FRS contribution, that increases. Do we get money from the state to cover those increases for FRS?
For 2020-21, we got approximately $4 million in from the district, an increase of revenue from the prior year to 2021. $3 million of that is to pay your teacher salary increase. $1.4 million comes out to cover that tax increase and a couple other changes, which basically mean the net change in the revenue stream for next year for the district is pretty much zero. So you got the money, but you have nothing left over.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay. Your increase between 19 and 20 in expenditures was your $5.3 million in salaries and benefits. And if you recall, this was the year at which we settled all the union negotiations and the prior contracts and et cetera. And that was my high-level overview. I didn't know if I had any specific questions. Oh, one more thing, if I may say. This is my second AFR with the district. The first one we don't want to talk about.
Sorry. You're right.
Yeah, the first one I don't want to talk about. The two ladies behind me, Michelle and Kim, they were key components in preparing this document and getting it all done, as well as other staff members. Without them, I would not be here today, and neither would this book.
Awesome. Mrs. Workman? Thank you so much, Mr. Fagan, for your humor, because at this point, what else can we do? And also for the dedication of your staff in the finance department. It has not been an easy road, but I'm happy that we are where we are today. Thank you.
And yeah, to follow up on that, although we're not on the budget book, in reviewing this budget book, when we get there, the comprehensiveness of this and the addressing each space where we said, but explain this and explain that, I want to thank you for that too. And to everybody in the finance department, because it really is gratifying to see after, I'm going to use a strong word, the trauma that we experienced over the last year, to see all of that pulling together in these documents is gratifying and encouraging. So thank you all.
Thank you.
So my suggestion in the future is if we're in desperate need of funds, which we always need funds, is we should write a book on what you had to go through, because maybe others could learn from it.
Or we could pull the money back out of the health insurance.
All right. We're not rewriting history.
Moving on. Next item is review of the 2021 budget, of which you have a copy. There is no supplement, so there will only be one book. There was no significant changes in the appropriations in the document, so pretty much everything stayed the same. If you remember, when we discussed the tentative budget before, we were in the throes of finalizing the year-end close, and of course, then you have always have some year-end adjustments. So the final book reflects those year-end adjustments, of which I will go over. There are two corrections on page 9. That resolution in the middle of the page underneath the state of Florida has Dr. Moxley's name. We've changed that to Dr. Moore. Also, right above that, there's a percentage that says 1.05. We changed that to 0.10, which is the correct rate. And on page 10, fourth paragraph down, where it talks about the total budget of 310 million, slight change in the last number. Instead of 371, instead of 373, it's 371. Moving on, for 1920, even though we finished up 1920, we did complete the year in a good position. Fund balance was approximately $16 million, or 11% of revenue. We implemented the district staff allocation model, which is fully implemented. All positions are fully funded. Total amount for GEARS grant going into 2021 is I'm just talking. I'm sorry, that's on the page.
That's fine.
I just was kind of hitting the highlights. Page 1.
Okay.
I was taking my lead from my superintendent.
Okay, stick to the script.
Don't blame him.
Your GEARS grants, on page 3, it says there's 3.8 million and another 203. Well, total GEARS grants right now that we have, that we're going to bring into the board, second meeting in September, is a total of $4.8 million. To help offset some of the costs of COVID, as well as some new items. We already mentioned the FRS increase is fully funded, and of course, we fully funded for the McKay and any increase in the family empowerment scholarships. Total budget is approximately 310 million, same amount as the prior tentative budget. There was overall a decrease between the tentative and the final of $2.9 million. You may think that's a large number, but that basically was when certain budgets, primarily in the federal side, they rolled money over. Thank you, Sue. Page 11. The bulk of that is cleaning up year-end fund balances, expenses coming in and adjusting revenue to be correct. The biggest change was in the federal side. Federal side, when we budget for the new year, we will anticipate a certain amount of roll. Well, that roll forward has now been put in the 2021 budget, and that fund has rolled into the new year and still includes the roll. So in essence, I've double budgeted for a short period of time. I don't know the official roll because I haven't gotten it from the states yet. So I have two choices. One, tell Title I, no, you don't get any roll, I'm only going to fund you based on your application. Well, that would mean they'd have to cut $1 million. Or I put them both in there and say, by the time I get to the final, I'll have it reconciled, and I'll put you where you need to be. So it's not a cut, it's just a reconciling item. Also, in 2020 budget, we have the $1.4 million increase for FRS and $1 million increase for the healthcare contribution. As a result, last year of COVID, we delivered a lot of food and had a lot of expenditures on the food service side. Necessarily all the revenue couldn't be collected because of the COVID. So we booked a receivable to cover the net ending fund balance, which was negative for food service. So that was a slight increase. You can't have a negative fund balance in a fund. COVID expenditures for 1920 were approximately $689,000.
Excuse me, what page are you on?
That one's just a note that I wrote down.
Got it. Because that relates to my next question.
Okay. 2021 year-to-date expenditures were approximately $600,000 for a total of $1.4 million. And then, of course, we mentioned $4.8 million of COVID grants.
Can we go back to food service for a second, please? Sure. Okay. So I'd like you to explain that to me in layman's terms.
Spent more money than you generated.
How did we do that if schools were closed?
You were still providing services and you were still paying employees.
My understanding was that the food service department was self-funding.
It is, yes, ma'am, it is, until you get to a situation where the revenue that you're generating based upon the meals you're serving cannot be fully reimbursed or do not offset the total cost of running the entire department.
At what point did you recognize that that was going to happen?
When we started getting into April and May, we saw the fund balance dipping down. You started the year with a strong beginning fund balance of 1.2 million. Original estimates figured that would cover it, but when we got into it, we were about $600,000 short.
Okay, so at what point did you start making different decisions within the food service department to begin to scale back so that we wouldn't have such a shortfall?
And work in concert with Mr. Bass, Mr. Bass, that is a plan to work into 2021's budget to monitor the expenditures and the revenue stream to make them more in line with each other.
As a board member, I was under the impression that the food services that we were providing to the county, and I'm not questioning the validity of what was done, to be clear, but I was under the impression that that fund, as it normally does, was self-funding, that any programs that we were running across the district were going to be covered by revenues from the fund, federal revenue.
It is up until a certain amount of point that you are still spending more than you can claim for reimbursements, and you're not selling a la carte at the schools because the schools are closed.
So at what point was it brought to the board that that fund that we were under the impression was self-funding was no longer doing so?
Until the final numbers are done in late June and July, we wouldn't have known. We had estimates, but until I book all the revenue and all the expenditures, it was a guess.
Okay,
Had to
so
wait.
my question, or I guess my concern would be going forward, that there needs to be some direction given at some point with that, and decisions going forward need to be informed by this situation.
I have a whole list of things.
Yeah, all right.
Mrs. Barrenborg?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you for doing that in a pandemic. I don't think you could have forecasted how much that cost could be, so that is a little concerning to me that, you had no idea what it was going to cost, and I get that. However, can't some of this be taken care of with grant money from CARES?
Through the service, through the chair. The original $3.3 million, I have I want to say $68,000 or $70,000 of food that was delivered during spring break, which you can't claim through food service program because schools are not in session. We shifted that to the CARES grant, so yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Also, the plan is the budget for next year has food service paying that back.
Okay, great.
The budget was set up with that understanding.
Well, just a note to that I would imagine that, if we're looking at revenue right now, with no hot lunches and it all being grab and go, that's affecting revenue, and snacks not also being sold, right? So you're expecting a revenue change in that department anyway, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
And also, through the chair, we've started back the à la carte sales also for the snacks.
Okay.
Go ahead. On the care stuff, and I don't know if you're planning to get to that, to really break down what we spent, what we received, where the deficits are, because the money that we received for CARES, you've implied before, doesn't actually cover our expenses. Are you going to break that down more?
To the chair, yes, ma'am. And the second meeting in September, there's going to be an agenda item to bring all the CARES, and we can address that then.
Where we'll see exactly what we got from the state, exactly
Yes.
what we spent, and exactly what the shortfall is.
You'll see the total amount of the grants, and you'll see what we spent year to date. It may not necessarily line up with each grant because some grants are specific and can only be used for new initiatives. So you can use it for cleaning supplies, for an example, but I can't use it to pay for a prior cleaning. I have to use it for future cleaning. Certain grants are written certain ways to where you can't go back and capture something that the district didn't do new. If you can say, for the big CARES grant, we implemented the counselors. They said, that's new, you can include that. But if I tried to include teachers, they would say, no, you already have that in your budget. That wasn't affected, and they have different rules and regulations for each grant.
So I think so my follow-up from what you just said is I'd want to see what happened last year, where we saw shortfalls, what was covered, what wasn't, and then how we use that for planning for the upcoming year, knowing that. And as I hear you saying, the CARES grants are broken into, when you say a grant for, think I'm here, that all within CARES, there are separate
Yes.
grants within CARES. So each time you refer to a grant, it's still under the umbrella of CARES.
Correct.
Right? And so under that umbrella, there are certain grants for certain things that can be used moving forward, but not retroactively. And our ability to plan moving forward, because we're still in the midst of this, I presume, is informed by what happened in the past that we either were reimbursed for or weren't reimbursed for, so that we understood better how to plan for that grant funding moving forward.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am, but keep in mind your grant funds have already been, quote, set, determined as to what they will fund. Some of them will help us recoup expenditures, some of them are just for new initiatives.
Yeah, and I think overall, as I understand this better, and I know that it's broken down into different categories, I'd be interested in knowing where what we're given is sufficient and where it's not, and then how we make up the difference.
Okay.
And my presumption, which may be wrong, is that in most cases, what we're given is insufficient, and we figure out how to make up the difference. But that may be a wrong assumption on my part.
Through the chair, no, ma'am, that is a correct assumption.
Thank you. I'd like to make I have 2 points. The first is, I'd appreciate if none of the comments that I make going forward are taken as an insensitivity to food sensitivity issues. I do want to, however, address that through the CARES Act, there was funding that was given in the form of pandemic EBT cards to students who attended a title school or a school that had free and reduced lunch up to a certain point, and all of the students were receiving free and reduced lunch credit. They received a pandemic EBT card. It was significant. Over $300 per student. So that was meant in order to be able to reach some of the students and some of the food insecurity. My daughter received one. She doesn't attend a title school. We're not sure why she received it. She is not alone in this across the country. My concern is the duplication of services. I can't sit here and ask you how much waste did we have on food service buses? How did we actually serve our students? Were we serving other members of the community? But as I look at the county receiving $9 million and us receiving $3 million, I absolutely do have a concern about us reaching past the need of providing services for our students. And in this situation, I do have a concern that there was a duplication and it wasn't our responsibility to do that. And by shouldering responsibility that isn't ours, we give other entities the opportunity to shirk responsibility or not recognize it and not use those funds for those types of things. The county could have partnered with us in food service using some of their CARES money to cover these costs, because we did, in fact, serve food, not necessarily to just our own students and families. So the reason I bring it up is that I hope going forward in any type of a pandemic or hurricane situation that we're mindful of these things. It's easy to spend other people's money. And we need to be very mindful as stewards of taxpayer dollars.
Mr. Fagan, and actually Dr. Moore or Mr. Bass probably has the answer to this. I stopped looking at the number of how many meals we delivered at around 500,000. How many from March 13th until the day we come back to school did we deliver to and because I went out on these bus deliveries, and they were very cautious in 18 and under, and adults could not come to that bus and they couldn't say, I'm getting these meals for my kids, because I would see, it was hard for the food service and the bus driver, but they would have to say, no, we have to see these individuals in person. So how many meals do we actually deliver to individuals that were 18 and under?
Through the chair, if you'll give me just a couple of minutes, I'll get you that answer.
Okay, because the last I checked, it was going into the 500,000s.
Through the chair, just prior to the opening of schools, that was when we did our opening of schools, it was 500, I'm looking at Ms. Maddox, I'm sure she can, just over $500,000, and the school started back up. I think it is important to note we still are doing for those in option 2 and option 3, there are pickup sites, same system and structure for the grab and go as if you were in brick and mortar, but we're still affording that opportunity for students to come in or families to come in and pick up those grab and go meals.
So my question is, with the EBT cards that students had received, were we able to apply any of those credits over into our funds? Because, I mean,
What do you mean?
the EBT cards that they received, was that for the grocery store, or was that
For anywhere that took WIC or EBT.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
and-
it was up to their
So
own
it
personal
wasn't,
use.
it wasn't a card that it wasn't a credit that they could receive?
Through the
It's like
chair.
a credit card.
Yeah, it was a debit card.
It's a debit card.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
three,
very-
over three,
and
like 330 a piece. So if you had 4 kids, you got 330 times 4. I mean, it's a lot
Led
of
by
money.
the agriculture department. It was very, I guess concerning is the right word. It was not implemented in the most effective way.
And not in concert with the way that school, specifically here, when we look at what happened, no, it's Indian River County is small. Was there abuse of the system? There probably wasn't a huge abuse of the system. However, when you multiply that across 67 counties in Florida and then across the United States, you're looking at a large duplication of services, and it's important to spend money where it's best used. You know, so, you know, and even with the county going forward with hurricane stuff, you know, it's working in collaboration and partnership.
Okay. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That is the first time I've heard that, and I'm gonna just read about it just to learn more about it, because as we go forward, we don't know, we can't foresee the future, but that's a loophole that needs to be fixed. I definitely agree with you there.
Through the chair, just a little more background on it. The USDA worked with DCF on issuing these cards. And so basically what happens is USDA, we do a upload of students who qualify for reduced meal pricing. And they take that upload and they generate out that TANF number, or the TANF number is issued out and they have a record of it. But what occurred was by USDA sending that money, those numbers and information to DCF, who oversaw this program, at some point in place, there was an error on their upload. And this was not just in Florida, it was in other states also. So you had lots of students who did not attend a Title I school, nor did they receive reduced lunch pricing, and they received the card.
So they received a card in the mail.
Yeah.
Yes, and then you had to call
Activate it.
to activate it, and then you could go
Okay.
buy foods with it.
Okay.
Do you have any idea what were the criteria by which they I mean, what I hear you saying is there were these criteria, but then it got messed up. So do we have any idea how it was determined who got these cards and
Yes.
who didn't?
I did some research about it. I worked with Representative Posey's office. Any students who were receiving Medicaid or WIC benefits received the card, and then you were supposed to receive, if you were at a school that was a Title I school, and the majority of Title I schools report 100% free and reduced
Sorry,
lunch.
I was distracted by that, so I'm not listening because I'm wondering what that is. I've never heard that noise in here before.
Amber Alert.
Okay.
Everybody's phone has an Amber Alert.
I'm sorry, because
There's a child missing, but we will not be on the road to see it probably. so,
Yeah,
right
it's
now.
like whatever that was totally distracted me. Can you back up a second?
So the point, what happened was normally anything for food services goes from the USDA to the Department of Agriculture. And in this specific instance, rather than it going through the Department of Agriculture, it went through DCF, my family's Florida. And because they also have the numbers for WIC and any type of Medicaid or any of those numbers of students in need. So they issued cards to all of those students, then they also issued cards to any students that were enrolled in Title I schools, and they pull those from us. But a school like North County Charter School that may not be 100% free and reduced lunch, or free and reduced lunch, but reports 100% because they can give free breakfast and lunch to all of their students. There's a USDA and Department of Ag allow that to happen. So there was a duplication of, and then some students received cards that they shouldn't have, and we're not sure, and perhaps Mr. Bass has more information than I do. As of right now, they are not sure why so many students that should not have been eligible for cards received them.
So if I understand this right, so your kids are at Beachland. Beachland has some free and reduced lunch kids. Therefore, because Beachland has some free and reduced lunch.
They didn't get it.
So how did, so
My
if you.
daughter, who's a high school student, got it. That was the mistake. But the students, this is the problem with this type of reporting system, because you have however many students at Beachland, 56% of students are free and reduced lunch. They did not receive a card unless they were enrolled for WIC or for Medicaid, Medicare, or any of those things, Medicaid. So some students did, that was the mistake. The other part of it was, there are students who attend North County Charter that if they put in an application to get free and reduced lunch, would not qualify. However, they received an EBT card because that school, through the allowed system, reports 100% free and reduced lunch because they're close enough. They're at 82, so they can, I don't, what's the number?
I'm not sure what the number is, but that's Community Eligibility Provision,
Right,
CEP.
CEP.
So the entire school
It says
receives
this community
meals
is
at
in
no
need,
charge.
so we give to everyone at the school.
The break-even number for financial purposes is around 80%. If your school is 80% free and reduced lunch. When you look at the CEP and what it does in the long run, it kind of breaks you even financially.
So do we have any idea what percentage of students receive these, or how, or why? Like, for example, Mrs. Justice got them for her kids.
I
I
just
didn't
got
get them for
one.
my kids, you didn't get them for your kids. How was the, I am so not following.
So working through
How
Representative Posey's office, my daughter receiving one, and there were other students at Vero Beach High School that received them, they should not have received them. We did not activate our card, but nothing would have stopped us from doing it if we wanted to. My concern was that $330 on an EBT card cost the taxpayer a lot more money than $330. So there are people who did activate them if they wanted to, and, you know, they're not sure how that happened. I think that's part of the reason why the new spending bill has been so scrutinized in Congress, because of the fact that there was duplication of services through the CARES Act.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing that up. It's very interesting. But I appreciate us having our food service that did go out and spend the summer and during that scary time of the pandemic when nobody really knew much about it, giving their time, going out and delivering these meals. So thank you for providing this. And even though I like to know the numbers, I appreciate, sometimes we get bogged down with procedures that we can't act, and I appreciate us going ahead and moving forward with this without knowing the exact numbers. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rosario, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
Forget it.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Fagan?
Moving on. Moving to page 64 is an impact for a millage comparison for homeowners. As a side note, I'm just talking now, nothing specifically in the book. The millage rate totally for everything this year, going for 2021, is 6.3960, which we'll be approving tonight. That's in comparison to 5.690 for the prior year, or a slight decrease of 2.6%. So your millage rate.
Go ahead, finish your sentence.
This is a decrease from last year, so your millage rate went down, but your property values went up. Property values went up approximately $916 million, or 4.6%. It's not uncommon when property values go up, your millage rates will go down. On page 64 is a comparison.
We have a question based on that.
Yeah, first of all, I want to go back to page 55 and say thank you for adding this. This is a request I had, so I appreciate that. Then on page 63 that you just mentioned, this is the proposed millage using the new millage that's going to pass?
Yes, ma'am.
Or okay. So could you maybe give us a little breakdown of, you know, what we asked the voters for and how we're going to be using that money? Those are in line, I see that. You've got instruction, pupil, personnel services, media services, curriculum, staff development, and technology. Could you explain maybe on the instruction who is going to be under this? Because in the past, we've had art teachers, music teachers, and I believe we moved those over to the general budget. So now I see instruction again in here on a millage. So I'm just curious, is this where you're talking about with the counselors, or where are we with this?
Sir, that's not next year. Can you, through the chair, can you tell me what page you're on now?
Yeah, page 63, where it says 112.
Yes. Okay, the 112 million, that, through the chair, that fund right there is general fund. So that's all funding, including your critical millage.
Okay, so that's general, that's not millage?
No, ma'am,
'Cause
that's
at the
m-
top, you're saying proposed millage.
Proposed millage is your .5 there in the middle, but that revenue stream for that .5 millage, that $9 million, is part of that $101 million in column 1 where it says general fund.
Okay,
It's part of that 101 million.
so what personnel then would be under the millage?
Based upon, remember now, this millage is based on prior year statute. Your new
Okay,
millage
that's
that
what
was
I'm
just
asking.
passed will
Okay.
not take effect, that resolution for that does not take effect until next year. So
Okay.
we're still following under the
So
same.
we're still following the old, that
Yes,
was my
ma'am.
first question to you and said, no, it's the new. So
Yes,
that's why I'm like, okay, I'm confused. All right. I just want to make sure that we're not doing that again.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Right. In my understanding, the new millage is for the personnel is for counselors, correct?
Is recruit, retain, qualified staff.
Mental health counselors.
Well, the way it reads is psychological and physical safety, as well as 21st century learning within classrooms. So we will create a budget moving forward, 100% aligned to that, and be very transparent on how we're connecting those collected dollars to the clearly defined ask, in which our community overwhelmingly supported. So I do think, as Board Member Berenborg was saying, there is a need for higher level of transparency in being on the front end of declaring where those dollars will be spent versus embedded into the overall budget. And I think as we continue to build trust with our community moving forward, that is a opportunity to say, you asked for this, you supported it overwhelmingly, this is the very specific budget in those particular areas moving forward, and looking forward to creating that space and those conversations moving forward.
Thank you. On page 65, which I believe you were just discussing, right? Have you gotten to that yet, or?
I was still on 64 for a
Okay.
second, through the chair.
I have a question about 65, so go ahead.
Very good. So 64 basically is an indication of the impact for the new millage rate for taxpayers in the area. If, basically, like I said, the required local effort went down by 0.173, which is a 2.63 reduction. If you're a homeowner with a $200,000 home and a $25,000 homestead exemption and no change in your property values, you actually will see a decrease in your property taxes. Now, keep in mind, this is only our taxes. This is not everybody else in the county's taxes. This is just school board taxes. Somebody else may go up in that same scenario, and actually you'll pay more. Taking that same example and assuming you did have a 6% increase in your value, but you had a 3% save your our home cap, you'll still see maybe an $8 increase or less than 1%. Page 65, this is a chart we put in the supplemental book from the tentative. It was an attempt to provide the board with information regarding what districts receive more funding through local versus state, and then show in comparison based on ranking who is very similar to the district, which gets most of your money through local sources, which means we have to wait until the property tax money rolls in November, versus other counties who get most of their money from the state and therefore are cash flush for the beginning of the year forward.
And you know I want to talk about this. Board members, in the past, we've had to go out to TAN, as we talked about. And this year, we're looking, I guess, at pretty good position. Next year, however, is a concern, which I know everybody's concerned about budget next year. And so when you look at this, then you're considering the top all the way down to, is it Manatee, right? That is getting 50% or more of their funding, right? They're giving up that money to the state more and waiting for their money. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, they're getting 50/50. They're getting 50% of their revenues coming from the state, so that means July 1, they'll get a proration every month of that 50%. So if you're getting $120 million, you're getting $10 million a year. If it's
Okay.
the other way around, you're gonna get less money from the state every month, and you're waiting on that big tax roll to hit, which will hit us, and that money basically carries us through the year. We're basically waiting on that big windfall.
So we're ninth on that list, which means there are only 8 counties that have more money than that's going to the state.
Correct.
Through the required local effort.
Correct.
So, board members, this is something that I want to discuss when we talk about what we want to put on our
Legislative
on our
platform.
legislative platform, yeah, because I think we need to start looking at this. It's more counties than I thought, which is good, because I think we can go to our legislator, and there's possibly, how many ever other legislators, 5, 10, 15, that are in the same boat. So that's a little different than just having 5. Whether or not that's enough to have that brought forward on the floor of the House or the Senate, I'm not sure, but I think it's worth discussing and trying to push.
And no one could really give more comment than Mr. Bass is not paying attention. I thought he might be done by the time I was Mr. Bass. Mr. Bass is very familiar, because Glades only has, 20-something% of, is ad valorem, and how much comes from the state?
Yeah, it was.
70, 30? Is it-
78, according to this.
Through the chair, roughly 77%.
Yeah, I mean, so, I hope that you would have some feedback about what that's like versus, your experience here, because that certainly can help to inform the conversation.
Yes, it's very nice to have a lot more at your, in your financial coffers to do what needs to be done.
On a regular basis throughout the year.
Regular basis, yes.
I just think that's something that we need to discuss further on how we would like to see our funds come to us versus how they've been coming to us for years. And I think nobody's really rocked the boat on that in a little while. So why not us?
We're getting good at it.
I think we need I'd like to pull that history again when they changed it, because we had researched that, if you remember.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. I
Yeah.
think that you're gonna see, that's why I liked doing Central Florida School Board Coalition, because you did get an interesting swath of districts from across the state, from the Gulf Coast to the Atlantic. But, what you really wanna look at is, you're right, that chart, and seeing who those people are, and then I think you need to pull your representatives together. I think there's a lot more power in that.
I agree with you, and I also think it's very, very important to look at which counties they are and how powerful they are. It is very political. This is very political. I know, I've seen it. So it's very political, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that the one right below us is a pretty big county. And that's what you want to look at, so.
Yeah, and I looked at this as well and was really surprised by how some of it, because us being next to Palm Beach, when we're such distinctly different counties, and some of the other ones, how is it determined? And you guys may know this because you've had this conversation. How is it determined, the percentage of local or state funding for each county? Because the way this falls out, I don't see rhyme or reason to it, but there's got to be some somewhere.
Through the chair, it's a mathematical formula based upon whatever revenues you generate divided by the total. It's just mathematical.
Revenues as far as ad valorem tax.
Oh, the ad valorem,
So how
Okay.
can we generate, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
okay, so what this sheet right here is just a calculation. How much did you get from the state and how much do you generate from local? How the rates are determined is based upon your millage rates and the state contribution. The state determines if your millage, if for us, if property values go up, your millage rate will go down. That means I get less from local. If it goes the other way, the state will give you more because you're collecting less locally. They will balance that out to where they, based upon their overall funding for the district, they will hit their budget. And they will play with those numbers until they get it where they need it. They're not worried about cash flow. They're just worried about balancing the budget. So there's two different conversations going on. One of them is, you're killing me with this cash flow because I don't generate enough. I'm not a net investor. I'm almost a net borrower. Duval, on the other hand, or some of the other counties, they're a net investor. They're sitting on $200 or $300 million that they never touch because of the difference between capital and local. They don't spend it all. So it's not bothering them at all. Palm Beach might be one of the same scenarios. They're generating so much, they're pooling their cash. It doesn't bother them. Even though they're right below us, it's because they're so large in the economy of scale, they never touch it. Us, other counties, no. I need every dime I have to make that payroll before October, November hits. So it's a much deeper conversation than just a percentage. It's, tell me about, compare me to down south. Well, they're a net investor. Well, take that off the table. I'm not a net investor. I'm a net borrower.
Well, and that really affects, and I had this conversation with Dr. Moore when he interviewed, because that really affects your ability as a district some of the things that Miami does, they're cash they're flush with cash sometimes. I mean, and they're able to do programs that we can't do because of the way our funding comes in. So it definitely affects our ability to be innovative. Would you agree with that, Dr. Moore?
Through the chair, it is a barrier that we probably can address in the process in which we're discussing right now. But it is definitely a challenge.
Mrs. Orr. One last thing, if you'll notice, there are 15 counties that are paying more, that are affected by this, and there are 52 that aren't. You can see why this is an uphill battle then politically. But I think that when you bring something up like that, even though it might be a molehill to a mountain, you can still say, I don't know if everybody's aware of this. I don't want to see us not do this, because this is the way other counties can, it's fair, you know? But I will say this, how fair is it to the counties, though, that are giving up the money and having to scramble to make payroll in November? I just like to see a different way that the state funds this out to us, so that we aren't in a pinch, okay? That's all.
Mrs. Berenberg, it's more than just making payroll.
Well, I know that.
No, but I mean, I just want to say,
It's
like,
being
when you
able to
look for
flush
evidence,
for money,
it's
yeah.
not just that minute of, it's not just those 2 months or whatever of chaos or crisis, right? But it's a general sustainability and innovativeness and then the ability to sustain those programs. And you'll be able to show evidence of districts that have been able to do that in certain areas where we have really not been able to.
Yeah, I'd just like to see this brought up as a discussion item in a workshop that we need to really dig into, so we can put it on a legislative platform with a
Good
real,
idea.
like you're saying, with specific information behind it to defend our case.
So when are we going to have that workshop?
It's funny you said, through the chair, I think the time in the next 2 weeks is to schedule that workshop. We have to identify our legislative priorities, get them solidified so we can begin advocating, so we can get up and do the work that needs to be done and the advocating that needs to be done. So time is of the essence.
Okay,
So I will schedule that.
that's a good answer. I like it. Thank you.
Moving on to page 66. That's just a comparison of revenue for the district, looking at the fourth calc, the first calc, and the second calc. When we got the first calc into this as, I think it was early March, we were looking at picking up an extra $4.8 million, so at the bottom of page 66. 4.8 million. Then the second calc came in, impact of end of the year, less revenues coming into the state, impact of COVID, expenditures of the state being greater than the revenues, slight adjustments got us down to the $4 million. So revenue budgeted, planned for next year, is an increase of 4. But of the 4, 3 million is your teacher salary allocation. $1.4 million is for your increase in FRS, and then the other increases that you have. So net budget funding-wise is your pretty much a 0. 69, we already
Can I
just.
ask a question on that?
Yes, ma'am.
Just quickly on page 67, line item 5, the FEFP, is that projected to go up that much because of enrollment increases, or you're saying the FRS has increased, the FEFP?
Page 67?
Yeah. Line item 5.
The FTE is a projection that we give DOE, that came from DOE. That's their projected number FTE for us. That is what we're looking at for this year. Yes, ma'am.
Because of increase in enrollment, or because that number is actually going up from the state? That's my question.
Actually, this number, we feed it into a model. The model goes to the DOE, and they ultimately give us the number, and we agree with it. So it's based on an increase in FTE.
They are increasing the
Yes.
number of FTE?
That was pre-COVID.
Per kid,
That was pre-COVID.
per
They'll
child?
do another calculation. and
That's
then
pre-COVID.
Well, I know how it works out.
Through the chair, another calculation per FTE. Now, student enrollment,
That's what I'm asking.
student enrollment in comparison to other counties, we're right where we were this time last year. So not a significant decrease, not a significant increase either. As you know, after Labor Day is the second influx of school. So where we were this time last year and where we are right now, we're very comfortable, which I think is a point of privilege or a point of pride for us in comparison to another number of districts as a result of COVID, as a result of onlining, educating, some of the pillaging other outside organizations have been done to collect FTE. we were able to maintain our enrollment in comparison to where we were at the same point last year. So that is good.
Yeah, that number I just wouldn't put in stone. That's, because I know after October and your February, then that's probably going to get adjusted, so, thank you.
Moving on to page 69, we already touched upon this. The ending fund balance for last year was approximately 16.5 million, or 11% of revenue, slight decrease from the prior year. For 2021, we have a budgeted ending fund balance of $8,067,000, which is 5.23%, which is 0.23 higher than the current board policy. Pages 70, 71, 72, and 73. I put in there for informational purposes what this is a separate DOE report where they do an analysis of ending fund balance for all districts in the state of Florida. This number is a little bit different than the number I gave you just a minute ago at 12%. That's basically all fund balances, all revenue. What the state likes to do is break it up between assigned, unassigned, restricted, categorical, and inventory, and et cetera. All kind of boils down to the same thing, but what I was hoping to do with this report, the question regarding fund balance had come up, so this is an indication of your districts that are carrying high fund balances. What I wanted to do was to compare this high fund balance back to the chart regarding state and local, because if I'm in a large district who's flush with cash, I should have a little bit larger increase in funding balance. If I'm rolling over a lot, like at Palm Beach, their fund balance was $147 million. Okay, what I don't know, though, is what is their average expenditures and et cetera. But if they're rolling 147 of assigned and unassigned, that's an indication of flush with cash, where we rolled 14 million. But again, it's all relationship to expenditures versus revenue. But we, on average, were pretty close to the state average just about every year. We were about 9. In 2019, state district average was 9. In 18, we were 10. State average was 9.51. We were a little higher in 17 and even a little bit higher in 16.
So, yeah, I have a question for them. So if this board or a board in the past had been told that we were dangerously low, below that 3% fund balance situation, so do we see now, is there a possibility that next year that we could be in that position?
Through the chair, no, ma'am.
Okay, and why is that?
Safeguards are in place to not spend more than the budget, and there's not anything that's, quote, not appropriated. There are no surprises. There's nothing in the budget, there's nothing not in the budget that has not already been accounted for, unless you have another massive COVID epidemic to where other scenarios occur.
But you have, like with the food situation, although much smaller in scale, obviously, you're addressing some of those areas.
To the chair, yes, ma'am. Okay. That's all I have, but I do have a couple of closing comments. We have the budget for next year, and we have the AFR for next year. Well, one of the things that we want to do is we want to do a supplemented AFR report. This is not required. This is a few pages, 10, 12, 14 pages. We're going to basically steal the concept from the property appraiser's office, from the county, and we're going to basically put a nice little thing that we can put out and have all the highlights regarding last year's activity. So this will be a supplement to the AFR, but it'll be a lot smaller version and do prior year comparison and et cetera. A couple other things that we're looking at that we did talk about lightly in the meeting today is going into the next year, the board had made a couple of comments regarding prior year's budget review and also prior year. So a couple of things we're looking to do next year as far as the monthly financial review process or quarterly, kind of depends on the activity. Some additional reports that will be part of the financials. So these are not budget items, these are additional reports on the financial side. But basically being able to identify how we're spending the textbook, science categorical, STEM money, and et cetera. Hurricane expenditures versus collections, mental health allocations, school rentals. We already have in design a quarterly report, a monthly report on the critical millage. This will tell you this is what I've budgeted, this is what I've spent, this is what's left, and where is it being spent. A question came up regarding ESC funding that's kind of blurred a little bit maybe with the budget, but we wanted to bring that forward and be able to get an indication of the total ESC funding of the schools that include all funding sources, general, federal, and et cetera. So you can see where all those sources are being delivered. We also wanted to look at food service. That's on my list. We also wanted to talk about discretionary funding for all divisions and schools, and also look at the state and local economy. What's ever going on there will impact us. If we're getting preliminary information now, we need to be prepared in the future.
Okay, we have Dr. Schiff that has a question, and then Mrs. Rosario.
Now I have more questions than the one I had.
You can only have one.
It's all in the same thing, it's all related. On that book, which I think is a great idea, because I think much of what we confront in the public is the public not really understanding, and going through 400 pages of a budget book is more than most people are going to do, of course. So I think a book like that is a great idea. My first question about that is that something that comes before the board for a vote, or is that something you just decide to do?
Through the chair, doesn't necessarily have to be voted on, but of course
But it has
will
to be
come the board.
approved by us, right?
Yes, yes.
So to paraphrase, what I think I hear you saying is you're asking if we think this would be, this is something you'd like to do moving forward, and you're asking if we concur, and we also think that would be a good idea.
Through the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay. For the record, I think it's a great idea.
This is just capturing what you will approve tonight and then making it in a way in which is not, as you said, 400 pages, but allows us to
Right.
really communicate the budget that has been approved.
Right, but it's not something we've done in the past. Right? What you're holding up is the county book, not our book.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
So what I hear Mr. Fagan saying is, this is something we'd like to do moving forward so that people understand, so that we increase the level of transparency about where the money is going that's reflected in the budget, that people are not likely to look in that great deal of detail.
Absolutely.
But also, particularly because we often get asked questions about the millage, where did it go, exactly how was it spent, in addition to some of the other things Mr. Fagan mentioned, correct?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
So,
Yes. Good job.
it's all right, I can defer. And the things that you mentioned after you held up the book, the ESE funding and there were a few other things you mentioned. Did I hear, were you saying those are additional things that you would like to produce, or those are things that would be included in that book?
Totally separate. This is last year's information. What I'm talking about is as we bring you monthly financial reports, that little packet we give, I want to expand on that. I want to pull certain
it.
things out to highlight, to say, hey, by the way, board, here's where you're spending your critical millage. Here's what we spent on textbooks. If I have money sitting in a fund balance for textbooks, it's because there's a plan to not spend it this year because we have a big adoption to do next year. This is what's going on with STEM. So a lot of times there were specific questions last year regarding expenditures regarding particular programs.
Right.
We're going to get in front of that moving forward to say, here's the budget for this year, here's the activity, here's the plan for the rest of it. When Mr. Meyer finishes his school improvement funds, we're going to look at that. Where's that going? How does it? We won't, instead of coming at the end of the year and having you look at 12 months of history, we want to bring you proactively during the year to say, these are some things that are going on, this is some activity.
Right. Perfect, great. I support. The culmination of which would be a book that we would produce at the end of the year. You're talking about producing a book like that retroactively. The information you're talking about providing proactively would, by the end of the year, then become an ongoing thing that would produce a book that people could look at and say, this is what we did with the money all year. Is that right?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Mr. Fagan, can you turn to page 88 for me, please? I have a question about the charter school litigation settlement.
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Let me see if I get this. Okay, the final budget book I see is 733,230. Is that right? That's for all charters?
To the chair, yes, ma'am.
Is that our remaining balance? Is that how I'm reading this correctly?
To the chair, no, ma'am.
Okay. What is our remaining balance?
right, Kim? Oh, 1.1?
1.5 years.
1.1 million is left.
Okay.
The balance to the chair is $1.1 million.
Okay, I heard something about years. What was that?
For 2021, we owe, and also for 2022, we owe.
2 more years.
Yes, ma'am.
No, a year and a half.
Year and a half, sorry.
So, year and a half. So this, so then what does 733 represent? 733,230? Is that just for this year, 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what we're going to be paying this year.
Yes, ma'am. That's your principal and
then-
interest payment.
And then the remaining will be the following year.
Yes, ma'am.
Half of
Okay.
that. 733 divided by 2
Approximately
is
another,
how we get the
yes,
1.1.
based on the outstanding, through the chair, based on the outstanding balance in the interest calculator.
Exactly.
Yep, thank you. I'm just going to circle back to food services one more time as we close out this discussion of the budget, because I think it's something important that we need to be sensitive of in our community. Many small business owners are suffering right now because they have not been able to have their stores open or be at full capacity with their services. And that's affecting some of our parents and families that may not have previously or may not currently, because of the reporting process, be able to get free or reduced lunch. One of the things that I've brought up before when we discuss food services and a surplus in that fund, because there had been times in the past where that fund has been spent in putting in new food equipment services or new displays in cafeterias and such, is the fact that we do have the ability to lower the cost of our food, of our lunch program for people that pay, full pay. Which is $2.25. If you have 4 children and you buy them lunch every day, $2.25 a day, it adds up very quickly. And so I think moving forward, I'd like to see this district make some effort, rather than continually collecting money if it's not necessary to collect it in the manner that we have from our families, but put more money into their pocketbooks. So if in the future there are surpluses in the food service fund, I don't know that there will be, but it would be, I think, nice for our families to recognize the fact that while most people might think that $2.25 is a small amount to pay, when you multiply it across your family and across all of the days in the school year, it adds up very, very quickly. And I just wanted to make a note of that as we move forward.
I appreciate you bringing that up, because just as a parent, like you said, it's an ongoing, always, I'm having to replenish that account. But, you know, for example, one of my kids would come home and say, I didn't get to eat lunch today because I have a balance of $2. And so I don't want, and that was last year. I don't know how we're doing it going forward this year. But looking at that scenario of a family that has lost their income, I agree with Mrs. Justice, where we might see it only $2. We don't know the conditions that these families are having to go through right now. And I would hope that we're not in that rigid mindset right now that if you have a balance, you can't eat today. Or you actually, instead of not eating, you have to go get I think a sandwich and water. And I know when you have teenagers or a middle schooler, they're going to forgo eating because they don't want to be seen as the kid that didn't have money for lunch. So I just hope that we can relax some of these standards right now.
To follow up on that, something I'm hearing, but I haven't confirmed, because I've heard it anecdotally, is that also with, and I don't know if this is true, but with the way we're doing lunch now because of COVID and the grab and go, I'm not clear there's always enough food in those. So I'm hoping we can,
If you just go visit a school and go look at the garbage can, there's food.
well, my kid comes home hungry every day, so that may be unique
Well,
to
and
my
he may be
child because
17.
he's a teenager.
My kids are always hungry, but there's food. It may not be food they want to eat. I mean, honestly, they get raisin packs in it every day. I don't know how many kids are chugging back Sun-made raisin packs. You know, I mean, my kids don't like raisins. They're throwing it away, I'm sure. you know, and that's not good. I'm not proud of it, but
Well, I think I'm only raising it, and if food services is listening, this is not a critique or criticism of food services, and I don't mean it that way. But I've never heard that complaint before. I never heard before there wasn't enough. And it wasn't, you know, so in that, it was, yeah, there's the base 225, but then there was a cookie, and then there was chips, and then there was the, you know, whatever. So it adds up, but now there's not that. So there's not, I don't think there's the ability to supplement in the way that for kids who want more than the 225 meal or sandwich are not getting enough to eat. And may not be getting enough to eat because there isn't the ability to pick and choose in the same way. And I'm raising this not as a criticism, but just as something could we look into, because I'm not clear that now that kids can't make the decisions for themselves on what they're getting and how much, to ensure that there is a way that they are getting enough. That
it
was
could
all.
be that he eats lunch at like 9:32. Just FYI, my daughter eats lunch at like 9:30.
Yeah, and to be honest, you know, my kid is not representative of, you know, 15,000 kids. But he's not an enormous eater. He's not like the kid who's always starving. So when my kid comes home hungry, that's surprising, actually. But it is because my lunches were never $2.25. They were always $5, $6 because he's always supplementing. Right. So I just want to, that's one of those things that, in our ability to adjust to the new circumstance, may be one of those unintended consequences that we don't see when the kids are not in charge of what they're getting in the same way.
Mrs. Berenborg, but
Yes.
can I make a comment real quick to clarify what I had just said? When I say that, you know, when a child comes up and they have a $2 balance, that doesn't mean that you don't add that to their account, you know, and then when that parent can come back and pay, I'm sure they will. So I wasn't saying let's just give everyone free lunch. I'm just saying let's have a little bit more grace and compassion as we move forward. Go ahead.
I'm going to make one comment about that before I bring up what I wanted to talk about. Having been a parent of 3 children that have gone through the school district, because I felt like that was too much money for me to be able to afford every day for 3 children. I actually packed lunches a lot. And, you know, you do what you do as a parent, but I don't think that in some respects we have to feed kids all the time. I think that, you know, parents choose to have children. And I don't want to see children go hungry. But I do think that we have in place a lot of calls, a lot of emails that go out to parents when you have a balance of $2. So I think there's that very careful balance that we have on how to handle that. And again, I think with you that, you know, we got to be careful of how we spend our money because we do want to be able to spend it in other ways too. And if we start doing stuff like that, I'm just afraid. When's the last time we increased the price of the meal? It's been years, yeah. And yet, with inflation, you know, cost of things have gone up. So, you know, I'm not sure if we need to lower it, maybe right now because of what's going on. That would be something. But I think if you want to do that, I think it should come up as a business meeting topic to vote on.
Oh, I didn't bring it up.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying,
Okay.
if anybody brings it up. I'm just looking across the
Yeah.
dais. The item I wanted to bring up is, I don't want to get into school by school, but I do look at the school by school. As you know, I look at those numbers that go woo, way up or way down, which is cool. I like to see that. But just as a suggestion or something that I've noticed that I'm confused by, if you look at Vero Beach High School, and the only reason why I pick on them is because it was the first school that's on here, on page 106, could you explain to me why it says school security? It's line item 1599. I'm assuming because of COVID, but I'm not sure. Why last year's actual expenditures were $34,560, this year's only $253. And then if you look over at the variance budget to PY actual expenditures, that percentage looks very weird. $11,759%. Never seen a percentage like that before. Just curious what that is. I've seen it a couple of times in here. You know, you have like 1,007. There's another one, 17,044% for P-card program for Beachland. So I'm like, why are these percentages? Because I'm comparing it to the other book you gave us before. As you know, I brought up a couple of items that I had questioned about in there, and I know that those were just tentative. This is actual finished for last year, but I'm confused by those percentages.
All right, through the chair. So school security, 34,000, then the next year, $253, and then final budget, 41,000 for 1920. Final budget for 2021 is 30,000. So my variance to the prior year expenditure is $11,000 comparing the 2021 to the 41,000. And then your 28%, and then your 28,000, because you are comparing $29,000 variance to $253. That's where you're getting an 11.
That's where that number is so
That's where
high?
you're getting an $11,000, 11,000% increase.
I'm just curious why that number is so different. You know, why did we spend so little this year compared to last year? Is it because of COVID and we didn't have extra security
schools.
needs?
Through the chair, my Lifeline just informed me that we moved some of that security money up to, at the top, you'll see a line that says 10079 Safe Schools. Wait a minute, let me double check.
Is that where we moved it to safe schools? And the same thing, right? It's security. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just a different funding source. It's doing the same thing. Okay, thank you.
So actually, for that year, you didn't spend 253, you spent 43,000. So-
Okay, and, you know, like P-card, I always look at that one because I know P-card can get you in trouble. So just asking the superintendent to make sure that we're looking at when a school's budgeting, and I see that they're increased what they were budgeted. We spent more than what we budgeted for each school. I see like one of them, it was because of electricity. I get that. Another one because of water. I get that. But if you see something like P-card or something like that, then you go, why is that school spending over what they should spend? So that's, I'm asking for you to look at that, okay? The other thing I saw, I was in a meeting the other day through different counties, and interesting thing that St. Lucie did that I'm curious, and it's budget related, so I'm curious if we had done something like that. When we were looking at, and we're still doing this, when we're looking at kids that don't have Wi-Fi, right? And we looked at, I guess, working with Comcast or some other groups, correct? One thing I know that St. Lucie did, what I've never heard us talk about, is they parked their buses that had Wi-Fi in certain neighborhoods so that they could provide Wi-Fi for the kids. Have we looked at doing something like that?
Have we needed to? Go ahead.
Through the chair, I think the direct answer is not yet. So if there was a need, so I think some of the work that technology, IT has done to provide access to students, the hotspots is the way in which we went in providing that additional information when Comcast wasn't working.
Yeah, because I have heard of that. I've heard of some parents hoping that the Comcast was working, wasn't working. There were some dead spots and stuff like that. So I'm just curious if we've looked into that, because I know the county to our south has done it, and it's been quite successful. So having those buses with Wi-Fi on them, how far does the Wi-Fi travel? You know, that's my question.
We'll look into it, because I can't even honestly answer if we have buses with Wi-Fi. So I think that's additional information I need to collect, because I don't have that answer.
Okay. That's all I have for this. Thank you.
Mrs. Wolf, I just have a quick question, a follow-up to that, and perhaps Dr. Moore has the answer. As students who chose brick and mortar education are coming back to school, if they, for some reason, do need to quarantine and they go home, most of our students have been issued a laptop that they're able to bring home with them, but I am aware that there are still some families who do not have internet access at their home. Is there a coordination with the district working with individual schools to supply hotspots to those students? Because I don't know that, if there is, I don't know that all stakeholders are aware of that coordination.
So the answer is yes, so we'll have to re-communicate that through the communications office to make sure everyone knows, because you never know if you are in brick and mortar, if you have to transition to a quarantine. We want that to be a seamless transition, and for that to be a reality, it requires the connectivity.
Thank you.
And just while we're on technology, I know that there's a lot of people who took out laptops from last year that haven't been returned yet. I know that there are kids in schools who then don't have laptops Because the schools are, at least in the high schools, are using individual laptops for kids, so we don't have to trade them out. And so some kids are not getting those yet. Do we have a plan? I know we keep putting out calls to get those laptops back, but do we have a contingency plan if we're not getting those back for how the kids in schools are going to get individual laptops so that we're not, for health and safety reasons?
Through the chair, yes, ma'am. We're in the process right now of calling individuals who have laptops that no longer need them to bring them in. Last count I had with Mr. McDonald, we had over 1,000 that were currently in inventory that were going to be distributed against the schools. Then you also have some that have been brought back in that may be broken or have missing keys, so we're having those either fixed if it's viable, or you may lose 200 or 300 because it costs more to fix them less. There is a possibility that when we get into it, that we may have a few that we're short that we're gonna have to buy some more. But the process now is to gather what we've got, re-image what we have, and redistribute back out.
And we have the funds to buy the new ones because I know we've gotten a few grants and we bought a whole bunch more.
We're in the
computers.
process of securing those funds as well. It'll be part of the review process when we get further into this year, is actually how many we might need.
Thank you.
Can I ask how many laptops are still out in homes that haven't been returned?
Greg?
Yeah, so that's a significant number. And when the parents received those laptops in the spring, when we were actively sending those out and, because we had to act quickly, was there any stipulation as to what would happen if it wasn't returned?
Through the chair, not necessarily, ma'am, no.
Because I do
It
know
would-
that you asked for driver's licenses and you had them sign a form.
So what we have done is connect the laptop to, so when you came in, as you know, because you were actively supporting and helping the checkout process, students completed the appropriate paperwork, connected them, so we have a record as to which students have been checked out a typical device, and have gone through a number of rounds, honestly, to collect and redistribute to provide the updates to pass them out. The number that Mr. McDonald just mentioned is still in the process of collecting, but we do know who those students are. So
Are those 22,000 then using them for at home, or those
200.
22,000?
that's more students that we have, but.
Right, so
You
I,
said 22,000, you
Right.
meant 2,200.
2,200.
No,
So-
we have them, and some of it is we just haven't heard back, or it doesn't mean that they're not using them. We have been intentional in saying we don't want any student to go without. So we have been transparent in saying, hey, if you're using the device or you need the device
Right.
dependent upon a quarantine or having to shift, in this particular reality, significantly different than the reality that we were in at the end of the school year, because it was a shared device kind of structure. I can go on now, and then I can go do some classwork. Here, in some of the environments, kids need to be on at the same time. So we were transparent in saying, keep the device, so we'll have it. We do have a record as to who has which device. What I'm familiar with and would need support in terms of clearing and going through the graduation process, there was always, at some point, you had to reconcile before you are exited from the system. And I would imagine the process is somewhat similar here. At some point, as you go to get cleared for graduation or you withdraw from the district, there is a process in which we say, okay, you have 2 textbooks at this particular school which haven't been returned and a laptop.
Right.
Well, so I want to add on to that. So my concern about this, I get, having kids have access at home, and they're also in school, and that's great. I agree with Dr. Schiff, though. I walked through several campuses, as you know, the week before school started, and I walked specifically into some 5th grade classrooms because we had a policy that all 5th graders have one-to-one devices. And I know that we don't have that going on right now, unless that's changed in the last couple of days. But we still have classrooms where we don't have those one-to-one devices for teachers to use in the classroom, even though I get that we're helping with kids that are home, but that's a concern of mine that we're not following the policy we had in place.
Can I
Dr.
follow up on
Schiff
that?
and then Mrs.
Also,
Justice.
have we reconciled, of those 2,200, how many of those kids are still in virtual learning options, or how many are back in school?
That's
Do
a
we know
good-
that?
That's a good question. Brick and mortar?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I
So-
followed.
So the outstanding
200
number.
are face-to-face in-school students who still have laptops checked out. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've had a number of questions about this, and obviously, you know, it's a complicated situation. I have a fifth grader, he has a device that's been bouncing around in his backpack back and forth from school. It comes out, I'm like, why are you carrying around a $500 laptop in your backpack? Like, very concerned about it as a school board member. So I called the teacher, we had a conversation, she said she's really not using them at home right now. I said, well, can we leave that at school, please? It doesn't need to come back and forth, he doesn't need it at home. Which leads me to my next question, Dr. Moore. High school students who have a computer that they use at home, when we went to the high school for orientation, we spoke with the principal, and he said, you need to use the district device. And the question was, but we don't have district devices right now for this child. And I said, okay, well, if a student has a laptop that they use at home, can they bring it into school to use in school for the purposes of doing their classwork? And the answer was no. So I don't really understand that. The answer was it was complicated, that there were lots of reasons why there were programs that wouldn't be on the computer, or the computer wouldn't have access to our network for certain reasons or different things. Is there a way we can simplify that? Because it doesn't make sense to me if students would like to use their own laptop that they wouldn't be able to do so in order to be able to do their work.
Why Greg's coming up. I see a need to have some securities in place so that kids can't download items onto their personal laptop and bring that information into the classroom. So I do see.
But
you
in
know,
the time of COVID, where we've seemed to have been able to get over a lot of these hurdles that kept us from being innovative in the past, this might be an area where we also can be innovative.
Well, I'd like to address that through the chair, that the cabinet has addressed a policy in which that you can bring your own device. We have the wireless setup that through the Bring Your Own Device network or the Guest Wireless network, you can bring in your own device. One of the things is you must be able to run the Chrome browser so that you can run any of our applications. You also must log in through our filtering service, which you would have to do anyway through the Guest Wireless or through the BYOD. And you would also have to adhere to our code of conduct and not have any stickers on your laptops that are offensive or anything else. So yes, it is allowable.
Has that been communicated to students?
It has not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
When will it be?
But will
So-
be, right? You're in the process of working
We just
out
did,
the
we just did.
policy on
There
that.
a model of continuous improvement. So as we learned that was an issue, I will be honest from my perspective. If a student has technology, you should be able to bring it. We need to move to a one-to-one device. Using different devices to me is very, very complex and hard, and it's just not easy to do. My daughters have had the same computer, versions of the same computer, for a number of years. So it is just us moving into the next step, creating the safeguards in terms of Mr. McDonald's system to make sure students can use that device, but we do need to continue to push that information out. So as we create it, we need to inform.
So, since you're still here, Mr. McDonald, why aren't we insisting on our teachers doing that then? If they're using their own computers, let's talk about a little bit of security here, since we've had an issue about this. How are we able to make that secure? Or should we be insisting that teachers, because we have a lot of virtual teachers out there still, are we able to control what's there, or do we need to insist that they use our property so everything's controlled?
For our teachers, they can use their personal devices, but through the responsible use policy, they should be under all the board policies necessary for accessing board information and resources.
I understand that, but my question, I guess, is, do we have control over what they can open if they're only using our equipment? Because of the safeguards that we put in place.
Correct me when I'm, while they're on our network, I think the answer to that question is yes. While they're outside of our network, then the answer,
Is yes. If it's our devices, we have a product called Lightspeed Relay, which is actually a little piece of software that is on the computers themselves. That takes a filtering agent through the cloud, so if we say it's allowable, then no matter where you go, that was one of the things that we wanted to ensure was in place before we handed the laptops out to the students through our first deployment distribution, was that they had that agent on there. So if they were off-site, they were still filtered and adhering to SIPA policies.
So that might help us a little bit with security then of our teachers. I know cost-wise, it might not be great, but it would help us with security of teachers that are off campus if they were only using our devices.
If they were only using our devices, absolutely.
Because if they, let's say, I've been frustrated too, I wanted to do something and all of a sudden this district computer says, no, you can't do it. We can still put in a white page, right, for that?
We can now safe list those.
Oh, safe list, okay.
And no, block list, yes. We're trying to be politically correct in
Okay.
our terminology now.
Yeah, it
but
used to be
yes.
called white pages or white lists, so
Yes.
I get that.
Yep.
And that's my point, is that a teacher can request an opening of a site that the district might say, no, you can't use that. And you say, what do you mean I
Can
can't
we
use that?
still get the notification of the request? Because, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, teachers can do what they want in the classroom or outside of the classroom. It's up to that teacher making the best decisions, right?
Well,
I mean,
no.
there's personal responsibility.
No, what I'm saying is the district computer can control what you can open and what you can't
I
open.
understand.
And that's why I'm thinking, why aren't we insisting then that our teachers are teaching virtually or using district computers?
Absolutely. 100% agree with you.
I think we should learn a lesson from what happened.
Absolutely.
I'd still like to know if they request something that they shouldn't be looking at, though. I'd like, you know what I mean?
Well, but there's a team that looks at that.
I'm just.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, that's why you asked for it to be listed.
They do, and a lot of times, we want coupons, it's like, no.
We'll look into that. I think it's
Dr. Schiff had a comment.
Yeah, quick follow-up. I know because of the challenge we're having getting the laptops back and haven't been returned, and the kids the in-school students who don't have laptops, I don't know the delay that's causing in the work that they're doing. And so do we have a plan for by when that's going to be rectified? I know it's hard because we can't say when somebody's going to return a laptop.
Right.
But what I don't want to see happen is that kids get behind in their work because they don't have the device in school that they need, and because we're not passing them out for health and safety reasons. So do we have a plan?
We do have a plan. Our main goal right now is through the refresh, and this week, we're going to be imaging approximately 1,200. Remember, we handed out the machines before.
Hold on, what does imaging mean?
Oh, good question. So when we have the laptops, they have software on there. Say it's Windows 10 version this, we have Chrome version whatever, and what we do is we totally format the machine like as if it had nothing on it, and it reloads the newest version of Windows, reloads a version of Office, puts on now where we don't have to pre-log in the students when they take it home. It has an always-on VPN, so it's connected to our resources here at the district, so that anybody could sign in that's one of our employees and or students at home. So that's what we're doing when we refresh, to make sure that should we shut down or the student is quarantined, they're able to take that device home and not, oh wait, it doesn't work. So that's why we want to make sure that all these images or all these computers are refreshed with a new image. And that's what we call as an image.
Thank you. Now I know what imaging means.
Yes.
And we have a plan by when kids
Well,
in school
right.
will either have a device or what we're going to do if they don't, and how we're going to make that happen so
Yes.
that they don't lose work time.
Right. Through our communications office, we're putting out that a blast to hopefully get a good chunk in. This week, we hope to have 1,200, and our main plan is to deploy these to our high school students. First credit-bearing students, and also the ones that need for any assessments that are going on this month. So we want to make sure that they have those first. In our elementary schools, there are still computer labs for them to have access to the computer resources, but any devices that we start getting in after the high school students are deployed, we're going directly out into our elementary schools. Going back to Ms. Berenborg's comment about the 5th grade students, in our Chromebook deployments, we targeted 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, where we had devices for every single student, all those grade levels. So yes, in your 1-to-1 initiative, 100%, there were the quantity of devices to support that.
Okay,
Thank you,
so
sir.
my question is, because I've been reading and hearing across the country, because virtual learning is how most schools are opening, a lot of schools are opening across the country, and there's a backlog on ordering the laptops. My question is, if we know right now that we more than likely are gonna need 2,000 more, or 2,200 more. You know, if we already know there's a 6-month backlog, you know, as a board member, I'd like to see that come forward as soon as possible, so we can also get in the loop, so that we can get ahead of this.
Through the chair, remember, we did approve the Chromebooks, right?
Correct.
Early on, which was a proactive step that we have taken. In looking across other districts, I couldn't be any more proud of the work that Mr. McDonald has led and put to use. Almost nervous having him sitting here on camera because someone's going to call from another district and try to steal him. It really has been.
The time you would have left it before.
It really has been an outstanding job, and as Mr. McDonald speaks, I hope you hear he has a plan for everything in which you're sharing, that you're hearing from your constituents already problem solving in order to correct the problem. So I think it is a complex problem, but where we are in comparison, I just want to kind of note the work that he has done. His team, laptop distributions after hours during the school day. It is probably one of the most overworked. Everyone's overworked. Let me be clear. But without complaint, just doing everything above and beyond to make sure students have the tools in their hands, whether it be in the home or in the school. So just outstanding work as we continue to problem solve.
But going back to, do you foresee that we will need more devices, that we're gonna be short? Because if we are, and if you foresee that, then we need to get proactive on it and get that order in.
We will, within the next couple of weeks, when we know some of the volumes. We do not want to be exceeding any inventories that we need, but we also don't want to be short. And yes, we have reached out to some of our vendors, and you're absolutely right, there is a 1 to 2 month delay. We are getting lots of advertisements of, oh, these are available, however, I do not take that properly. I think that we should, be more proactive, but I also want to make sure we know what the numbers are first.
Right.
I'm going to be sticky on this because it is something that's very concerning to me, going back to the adults that are going to be teaching kids remotely. Could we get an update on those adults using our equipment?
Through the chair, what, who is using a device versus who is not?
No.
Or
How many is
No.
not?
What I'm saying is, there have been teachers, and we know of a case, right, that have used their own computers, and even though they might be on our internet or whatever, that's different than using our device. You said to me that we can control everything that's on our device, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so I would rather see remote teachers using our device, not their own. I know there's a cost factor there, I get that, but I just think that we need to avoid anything that could happen again.
So through the chair, we will have to pull and identify those who are on accommodations, meaning that they are at home and the device that they are using.
Right?
And
But I would like an update given to the
Yeah.
board.
I have a question about that. Again, at what point does personal responsibility play a role in this? Because, I mean, I understand the situation. I think that's a one-off. I don't think it's happening a lot. I mean, it's one time is enough, please. But, at what point do we, when we engage our teachers and they're teaching, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's outside the classroom, what's the agreement as far as, moral and ethical standards? And, I mean, you can't sit and babysit a teacher in a classroom to make sure that they're not going to say or do something or expose students to something on their phone that they have access to. So I'm just curious about personal responsibility here in adults.
Mrs. Ork, common sense isn't so common. And I think that as a board and as a school district, we should protect children as much as possible. And I get that personal responsibility is something that we assume people would take on their own, but again, common sense isn't so common. I have learned that as a principal. I have learned that in lots of situations. What I'm saying, Mrs. Justice, is if we don't take that precaution, then shame on us.
Well, and I would take it one step further and then say to you that I think there are questionable things that children are exposed to by teachers, not only virtually, but in the classroom.
I get that,
And
that's another discussion.
But what I'm
that-
saying is in this, it can't be divided, it can't be separated, in my opinion.
Mrs. Justice, I'm bringing this point up. I'm not bringing that other point up. What I'm bringing up is, if we have the ability to control that, why aren't we? That is something we should be controlling if we have that ability.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. I'm not disagreeing with either side of what the discussion is. But I'd like to bring up just a caution. For the teachers that are teaching from home, there is a limitation to using district devices from home. For example, they cannot print and connect a district device wirelessly to their computer unless those limitations are lifted. There are other limitations from using a district device in their home that might prevent teachers from really working to the best of their ability 100% while doing it from home. However, for those teachers that are like the one that we're referring to here, who was actually in the classroom, I think that that's a different situation. That if you're in the school building, then using a district device might actually be something that we can discuss. But I don't know if this is the right time to discuss either side of all of these pros and cons issues. I do believe that we have to be very safe. And I do agree with Mrs. Barenborg in that, we should look into these situations to avoid possible future unethical behaviors.
All right.
Did I see talking, so I don't know if I'm missing something or.
No, both Dr. Schiff and Mrs. Barenborg want to make a comment, so I was just letting them know what order they could speak.
Yeah,
Go
so this isn't the opportunity. I know that we're just talking about this, but I do agree that Dr. Moore should bring back to us after he's fully researched what he needs to research, and then we can take it from there.
Dr. Schiff?
I think this is a more complicated question that requires probably a deeper discussion than we're able to do now, because the question about what are teachers allowed to look at, what materials are they allowed to have access to, and how all of that works is actually a much bigger question, I think, that Mrs. Justice raises, and to Mrs. Barenborg's point about what we allow and what we don't. That's in part a technology question, but it's also a policy question, which leads into a lot of other discussions. So perhaps if this is going to continue, if this is going to come up, I think we need to have, we either need to have a clear conversation about it, or we need to handle, what needs to be done right now in this moment to get laptops to kids who need them. And sort of bite-size this, because I don't know that we can have the larger discussion now. But every time we talk about what's allowed and not allowed, to whom and when, in what circumstance, at home, it is a Pandora's box. So I think we need to make some decisions about the degree to which we're going to have that conversation and when and how we're going to have it.
Mrs. Barenborg?
Thank you. I am not disagreeing at all with Ms. Justice's concern about other things that are being exposed to kids. And you're right, that needs to be a big discussion. We need to discuss that. What I'm saying is, I feel a sense of urgency because of what happened in our district. It was not a teacher, I believe, that was in the classroom, correct?
Correct.
It was a teacher at home. That's what I'm referring to, is if we don't have it in our power to stop something like that, or to at least try to stop something like that, are we opening ourselves up to something else? And I want to avoid more litigation. I want to avoid more issues. I want to avoid spending money the wrong way. And I think if we're looking at this, if it's doable, if we have the funds, if we have the computers, why aren't we doing this? If it's going to add protection for kids.
And I think this is a very, even though it's an off topic, but we are on topic of trying to fund and see if we
Right,
need to
and
purchase more
computers, yeah.
laptops. So I see it's irrelevant.
It's also
but-
urgent since it was just happened.
I do agree with Mrs. Berenborg. We should have some sense of urgency to common sense here. If common sense is saying that, an instructor cannot open other websites while on a computer that we gave to that instructor, and they have the virtual learning or transitional learning while the students are on there, I don't know why we wouldn't be doing that. I think it's very relevant to when we're talking about our budget. And so that's something I would like to see if we don't have the funding, is we have to look at what do we as a board need to do, and if we have to put it on the next agenda coming up in a couple of weeks as an action item, and then we can discuss it then, we can do it then.
My concern, and why I think this is a much bigger conversation, is because as soon as we start talking about what's acceptable and what's not, that's a much bigger conversation. It appears that there's some some obvious no-brainers, like the thing that happened. But I think there are finer details of what is considered educative and what is not, and the standards by which we determine that. That means if we're blocking certain sites, we have to be very clear about what the policy is, why we're blocking what we're blocking, and on what basis we're making those decisions. That's my concern, because I think there is not necessarily clear and obvious agreement about all of that. There is about the circumstance that happened, but I think it's a much bigger conversation about educational values. And that's the one that I'm concerned about as we move forward, that we have that conversation in a way that is robust.
And I think that's two separate conversations.
Correct. That's my
I do
point.
agree, but I still
That's my
think we
point.
need to move forward with getting the laptops.
One last point on that, Mrs. Ork.
I was waiting.
No, actually, my name has been out there for quite a while.
Mrs. Berenborg and
Thank you.
then Mrs. Justice.
One last point, and this is why I'm so concerned about it. Normally, I don't speak up about this, but I am very concerned about this. I am not saying that we are going to filter sites that we wouldn't normally. What I'm saying is we already have that in place. I'm not saying to add more. I'm saying to take what we already have in place. If I was a teacher in the classroom, I would be using a device like this device that I can only go into certain things. And then if I go into something I shouldn't go into, there's a warning, and I have to call down there and say, hey, can I get this website? Here's why. And that's done, or it's not done, right? We already have that in place. I'm not saying to add more filters. I'm saying to just give them a county computer that we already have those in place. Not to add to it, just to, if you're at home working, it's the same as if a classroom teacher is working. I should, as a classroom teacher, have the same ability to go on any sites that a person on the home computer has. And if a person on their home computer can go into more sites than a person in the classroom, that's what scares me. That's what I'm asking for. I'm not asking for anything else other than give them a device that they've already used in the classroom that has those same protections. That's all.
Mrs. Justice.
My concern was making sure that students had devices before teachers did. If teacher has a device to use at home, we trust teachers with a huge responsibility to be around students every day. I'm going to repeat again, I think this situation was a one-off. I don't think this is a rampant issue that we're dealing with teachers. God help us if we are. And just wanting to make sure that students get devices that they need. Thank you.
Well, I'm gonna, I'm sorry, Mrs. Rosario.
Thank you. I think we're all in agreement that we should have this conversation at a later date. This is a very important discussion that we should have, but we also have many other items still on our agenda. What we're discussing now is not on our agenda, so I would just ask for us to be mindful of the rest of the items. It's after 3 o'clock right now, so maybe we can agree to talk about this at another time and then return to our agenda item.
So I have a suggestion. We have been very gracious in being able, and Dr. Moore has needed it for the superintendent's workshop. I feel that there are a couple of items that need to be talked about. They need to be discussed. They're not pleasant topics, but I believe that our next meeting, we should look at having board discussion and have this item on that board discussion. And also, you know, I feel that there's the other issue that I had brought up with Dr. Moore about supplemental curriculum, so I also want to have that on the next discussion.
Through the chair, my recommendation on just listening to the conversation is we can assess which teachers are at home using which technology in order to make an informed decision and then notify the board, and we can do that relatively quickly. And then having a discussion regarding the items in which you just selected at our next meeting, also to include our legislative priorities. Absolutely, those are not difficult conversations. They are conversations in which we need to lead in a bold and aggressive way and transparent way. So having the opportunity to have a conversation regarding the safeguards that we have in place, absolutely. Looking forward to it, and I'll norm on the actual topics in the coming week.
Okay, perfect. So we'll add these two items to that next workshop.
All right, Mr. Fagan, congratulations on your...
Thank you for that opportunity to go over that short overview.
Next on the agenda is Ms. Dampier, who will be presenting two items. Ms. Dampier?
Good afternoon.
You're on. Your battery died.
Good afternoon through the chair. My first item is the approval of the 2020 through 2022 School Health Services Plan. This biannual plan outlines the provisions and responsibilities to provide mandated health services. Each local county health department is required to develop this plan in collaboration with the local school district and school health advisory committee. This is our biannual, this is our time to bring this forward. Do you have any questions?
Any questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
I see some changes in here, obviously, because of what we've been going through. So how will this be funded, some of those changes? Is it through CARES grant, or is it just absorbed into the budget? There was a couple things I saw that might be a budget issue.
As far as the funding here, the health department receives C funding. They're allocated that based on the State Department, and we don't have anything to do with that funding for that.
Okay, so that's going to be separate?
Yes.
All right.
I have a question.
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I do, I'm just not sure if I want to ask it, so.
all right. Is that all you have on this presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Excuse me, Mrs. Sorg, is our internet down right now?
I don't know.
Oh, mine's
I
fine.
have my book.
Seems to be fine.
Mr. McDonald, help me for a moment, perhaps?
Okay.
Thank you.
Pam, go ahead.
Any other questions? Okay. The next item is the presentation of the Uniform Statewide Assessment Calendar. We're very excited about the calendar. The schedule includes both state mandated assessments and district required assessments that are used as diagnostic and progress monitoring tools. Due to the elimination of the district required final exams, we have reduced the amount of testing. We went from 2.66 to 1.92 percentage that's required this school year. So we're pleased about that. Are there any questions?
I have a comment. Thank you.
I like this one. Thank you. Mrs. Dampier, can you tell me how this will be communicated, this change will be communicated to parents and families? I made a note at our last board meeting regarding what I joked was COVID lemonade. That helped us to be able to change a few things and make some bold decisions regarding what was best for students. So again, how are these changes being communicated to families?
As far as the unit assessments, we will roll that out through our communications department to announce the number of unit assessments we've had from last year to this year, so parents are aware of that. We already have a calendar for that outlined, so that has been reduced. And we've had plenty of conversation, and we will continue talking about the reduction in, actually, the elimination of the final exams for this school year. So that has been done.
Great, and so I just think it's important to note, you know, parents sometimes are concerned. If a parent hears perhaps that final exams won't be taking place, they might have a concern as to why that is, and perhaps they may not understand. They may be concerned that it might affect the quality of the education that their child is receiving. So when we communicate that, if we could do perhaps a fact sheet or something explaining some of the benefits for students in not having midterms and finals, I think it might be helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs.
Thank you.
Berenberg, did you?
What happened?
Okay,
No, I just said thank you.
okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. Rosario?
Thank you. Mrs. Dampier, I'd just like to actually ask you to share with the public. I've had several parents ask about the increase in minutes for K1 and 2, and I've shared with them what we've talked about in private in our meetings. So overall, there have been great reductions from grades 3 through 12. With the exception of K1 and 2. So just for those other parents who may want an explanation for that, can you just explain why we are 105 minutes more for K1 and 2 and not for the other grades?
As far as K1 and 2, this current school year, we added DIBELS, which is assessing the literacy of our students in those lower grades to find out what deficit. Our progress monitoring tool that we currently use, iReady, does not give us every bit of, it does not identify every need that the kid is missing. So our teachers have currently been using this already. We just wanted to make sure it was utilized, you know, district-wide, to make sure all of our kids had access to this tool and our teachers had access to this tool. So that's been added for DIBELS. Also, in the previous years, last year, we reduced the number of the diagnostics. It was actually, for K1, 2, and 3, it was, at one point, we were moving to 2 diagnostic, but we increased it this year to 3 diagnostics to make sure that we're progress monitoring along the way. So if you recall, last year, we did do a reduction in the iReady, and this year, we brought it back from 2 to 3.
Thank you. So overall, I mean, with regard to the DIBELS, we're not adding DIBELS to the practice of our classes on a daily basis. DIBELS has already been a practice within the classrooms. It's just that in previous assessment calendars, the DIBELS wasn't captured in the actual calendar that we're looking at now. So this year, from based on what we've talked about, we are capturing, with the effort to be completely transparent, we're capturing even the DIBELS within the assessment calendar. So that's why it appears like the minutes are a little bit more, but actually the practice has not, we're not adding something new. We're not adding a new test.
That is correct. We did not require that before. We are requiring it this year to make sure that it's accessible to all of our schools and to all of our students, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all kids. Instead of some schools doing it because they had the money, we're doing it for all of our kids.
Yeah, I'll tell you, just so that the board members know, this was a concern of mine. Some of the numbers were much higher than what they are right now, and I'm glad that we have had a chance, Mrs. Dampier and your team, you've had a chance to really look at this. I am a proponent of kids in the early ages, especially Ks, learning through play. And I do not want our youngest within our district to sit at a computer and, miss out on some really creative learning that can happen through the natural process of play, and replace that with, computer testing or something else that older grade levels, have the capacity, to actually sit and do. But I'm glad that we have made overall reductions. I'm glad that we're able to articulate, the differences here. And I'm just, I'd be happy to support this. So thank you very much.
Mrs. Orr, I think what concerns parents is testing, testing little kids. And I think Dibbles, if people were more aware of how that's delivered and how it's done, I think they would not see it as a test, but more of a chance for a child and a teacher to connect one-on-one, so that teacher really understands the needs for each child. Is Dibbles still given that way?
Yes, and we used to do it long years ago, probably about 15 years ago when the kids were napping. The kids would come up one by one when they were on cots, and
Exactly.
individual teachers were testing the kids, having them come up while everybody else was sleeping. They'd call them up one by one. But, we don't nap anymore. But that's the way it used to be done and back in the day when.
The kids consider it more of like a game or show what you know versus
Yes,
a test.
yes.
And I think that if parents understood that part, and I think they'd really feel a sense of relief that we're not testing the kids more, we're just having more opportunities for them to have a one-on-one conversation with their teacher, and the teacher to really get to know their needs.
Yep.
Which brings us back to like the fact, the why. Let's let them have a frequently asked questions and let them know the why.
Right.
So I do have two questions.
Yes.
So when we're looking at the uniform statewide assessment calendar, is it going to vary for the virtual students, the assessment calendar? Because are we going to have that for the virtual students, and the brick and mortar students are going to have the same assessment?
Mr. Myers, do you want to talk about that, the virtual platform?
So let me take a stab at it. So the intent is to have that information available to us to drive instruction. And all of these assessments really are to inform our ability to modify and improve the instruction. So I think it's important to keep in mind, in brick and mortar, that is the most familiar, transparent way of us doing our way of work. Moving forward, at the end of this week, we'll be making a decision regarding transitional students returning to brick and mortar or having to continue on in the environment in which they're currently in. As you know, in transitional, that is a typical experience where we're able to have a confines of a school day. It is a school day just online. So the goal is to have them return if the reality allows us to do so, but to use informal assessments through teachers moving forward in order to have that information available to us, really to improve and drive our instruction. The virtual model is a self-paced model, although we've aligned it to our particular pacing guides. It is a self-paced model, so a student may be a little bit further ahead, maybe a little bit further along. Us assessing content that hasn't been covered doesn't yield us the opportunity to drive or improve or modify instruction. But the goal is to collect meaningful information from all, regardless of the environment in which they're in, as best we can. But obviously, within the two virtual models, it will be a bit challenging.
Okay. And I have a second question on iReady, because iReady is based on the Common Core state standards, and we know that the governor has had issued BEST for Florida, the BEST standards. That is coming next school year, is that correct? The BEST standards for ELA and math? Mm-hmm. So if iReady is one of the main platforms that we use from K through 8th grade that I'm seeing for assessments and monitoring, is the iReady company prepared to develop assessments that are based on the BEST standards?
I would assume so. The conversations that we've had, everyone's scrambling, all the vendors, of course, making sure, I think with COVID-19, that sort of put a pause on everything. But the goal is that there will be progress monitoring platforms for all of the new standards. And iReady may be something that we use next year. It may not be something that we use next year. We just have to see what's out there.
Through the chair, the shift next year is for K through 2.
Okay.
And so 3 through 8 follows a year after. And then there's a shift also between math and ELA. ELA is first, then math. And that's another reason why we wanted to implement DIBELS, because DIBELS is something, as we said, has been around a long time. Oral reading fluency is a very trusted measure of student progress monitoring. So by collecting the oral reading fluency this year will enable us to track progress for the next couple of years for those students and growth. To exactly your point, if there's a shift in progress monitoring tools such as iReady, we would be able to longitudinally look at our students' progress. But I would echo what Ms. Dampier said. We don't know the extent of what each vendor is or is not going to do as far as developing products that meet the best standards. So the instructional materials bid is out. It's also something that's unknown. I mean, who will bid on these sort of products as we watch them come to fruition? Or honestly, if the state's going to do stuff. So there's an opportunity with some of the CARES Fund and the GEARS Fund for the state to develop a progress monitoring tool that would be maybe possibly free of charge. When I was at Just Read Florida, we had the FAIR assessment that the districts could use that the state developed. So,
Well, I like that term, free of charge, because I think this is like 500,000 a year that we're paying for iReady, and is that something we need to put on our platform?
Can I make a statement about that?
Yeah.
I have had a conversation with Erin Grawl about that specifically, because she has had, I think she's talked to you about it, correct? About bringing that forward as an idea for, and I don't think she's the only representative that's talked about this.
in the governor's GEAR budget, there was, I think, $20 million set aside for the development of or the procurement, potentially I have to go back and look at the language, of a pre-K to 3 progress monitoring screening tool. I don't recall that it went all the way to 8th grade, but I know the state, is looking into what they can do to have more uniform systems of progress monitoring, because it just helps them.
And I imagine that that's a political thing, because when you're taking money away from big companies that create assessments, I'm sure that would be an interesting conversation to have in a room.
So they don't want to be best by kids, they want to be best by their own pocketbooks?
Exactly.
So,
Well, I think this conversation has to also be tempered with, and the enthusiasm for a statewide assessment be tempered with our experience with the FSA. So be careful what you wish for.
well, at best is going to have an assessment at the
Correct.
end, but what we're looking at is
Right,
the
but-
monitoring tools, that's two separate things.
Sure, no, and I completely understand that, but given our experience with the FSA and sometimes the disconnection between learning and engagement with students in the classroom, do we want the state creating a progress monitoring assessment that we're required to use throughout the year? And I think, from my perspective, and perhaps from some other educators' perspectives, that's not necessarily in the best interest of students either. So I think it's something that needs to be, I think we need to tread carefully in requesting that type of program or assessment.
I would like to add that too, when we talk about, Mrs. Barrenborn, when we talk about the legislative platform, is have a deeper conversation on that topic. If we can save 500,000, I want to look at both sides. So,
Any other questions?
I would just like to add, I have no love for iReady or any of their diagnostics either, so I'm not arguing, I'm not transitioning to a job lobbying for them.
well, and we all know that I'm not a proponent of iReady, but during the time of COVID, we have to shift and modify. What we once thought was best is not always best in all situations, so that's why I want to talk about it.
Okay.
Now moving on to Mr. Meyer.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Through the chair, I have 4 items, 2 of which are very similar, so I'll present those in tandem. Per Section 1007-271 of Florida statutes requires, how should I put this, the post-secondary institutions to have certain types of agreements. So my first item is requesting approval of the dual enrollment articulation agreement between Treasure Coast Technical College and our high school. So interestingly enough, each career center established under 100144 shall enter into agreement with each high school and any districts that it serves in order to provide career dual enrollment as a curricular option for those secondary students. Interestingly enough, Treasure Coast Technical College is overseen by this board, so we sort of have a dual enrollment agreement with ourselves. but we are meeting the requirements of the law here to make sure the Treasure Coast Technical College has that with our high schools. So that's the first item. And then second, which is very similar to that, is the requesting approval of the dual enrollment articulation agreement with Treasure Coast Technical College. So also in 10.07.271, each public post-secondary institution eligible to participate in the dual enrollment program must enter into a homeschool articulation agreement with each homeschool student. And both of these are very valuable documents because they spell out the criteria for enrollment, what the courses count towards, fees and dues, and those sort of things. So those are the two items that are very similar in nature that are bringing before the board tonight. Any questions about those that I could help answer?
No.
The third item is, as we've mentioned a couple of times already today, the Governor's Education Initiative, also known as GEAR. In this, one program that was established was to create opportunities for our earliest learners, or close to our earliest learners. It was called the Rising K program. And in the Rising K program, it enabled our students who had already participated in VPK, who had been found to have certain reading deficiencies, to have an additional 80 hours to have that transition to kindergarten. Due to the timing and the release of everything, the Department of Education did extend this to allow the program to go all the way to October 30th. So we have applied for it and have received that grant, and it's actually being used for our current kindergartners. So although we call it Rising K, is actually our current K students. So very excited to provide some of those students an additional afternoon or possibly weekend opportunity to get that 80 hours, to get them caught up to some of their peers. In order to receive this, we have to have an MOU with the Early Learning Coalition. So as Mr. Fagan mentioned, he'll bring the item from the majority of the CARES/GEAR funds that come to the district. They come directly from the Department of Education. Because of the funding streams for the Office of Early Learning, we go through our Early Learning Coalition. So seeking approval from the board to enter into this MOU with the Early Learning Coalition in order to draw down these funds so these students can get that additional 80 hours.
Okay, we have two comments, Mrs. Barrenborg and then Mrs. Justice. Did you have a?
Sure.
I did.
I just want clarification, and then I have a comment about it. So, we've had conversations about the ELC and my concerns about some of that. So they're like the oversight agent for the funds coming from the state through them to this program. Is that correct?
They're just a pass-through.
Okay. So as a pass-through, will they be receiving funds? And if so, what will they be doing for those funds?
To my knowledge, they receive no funds. They're just a pass-through.
Okay. Thank you.
I like this because I feel that we're identifying students in kindergarten who need this type of intervention or support. One of the things that had been challenging about Step Into Kindergarten and some of that support was that only certain students qualified for that type of program. And what we saw was once students entered our classrooms in kindergarten, we saw some deficiencies that hadn't been recognized before. And they're having some conversation about transitioning from not just step into kindergarten, but kind of like a jump into first program. So I hope that this is the beginning of looking at kindergartners where they are as we've assessed them through whatever process with IEPs that have been developed for kindergartners, and that we do more of a targeted support of those students as they transition through kindergarten into first grade with our district. I think it's an area that could really use some attention.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And my final item of the day,
Oh, you have another comment? Okay. All righty.
all right, so per the Florida Department of Education Curriculum Frameworks for Practical Nursing, Standard 25 states that students have to demonstrate how to care for maternal and newborn patients utilizing nursing principles, which can be accomplished through a combination of simulation, laboratory, and clinical settings. So today we're seeking approval to procure a maternity nursing simulator for this purpose. Due to COVID-19, our practical nursing students at Treasure Coast Technical College are not able now to participate in those maternity clinical rounds at Cleveland Clinic, of course, to help reduce the potential harm that could come with spreading COVID. So in order to make sure that our students are still able to demonstrate that standard and get their certificate, we're requesting to get this maternity simulator, which will enable them to meet that standard, and that is the item.
Are you rolling that in now?
Go ahead.
And sorry, not to interrupt you, but this is another one of the instances where we utilize the CARES funds to make sure we make that
Right.
purpose. So that's where the
Thank
money's
you
coming
for
from.
finding an alternative for these students that wouldn't be able to normally go into the hospital. My question is, we don't know how long this is going to be where they can't go back into the hospital, right? And so this is a very costly item, which I can't imagine, but the warranty for that, for the actual simulator and for the software that goes with it, do you know what's that warranty going to be?
I don't know the warranty off the
Lifetime,
top of
5 years? Because I would imagine they would eventually get to go back into the hospital and use that, the facility of the hospital for this education.
Sure, I mean, are you saying the warranty or is in possibly returning it?
Yeah, I'm just curious, is this something we're going to live with, and if so, how long? Or is this something that we can return after a certain amount of time? Can
Sure.
you lease one, I guess is
Yeah,
the question.
I don't know the specifics of that, but I would say that having this simulator would enable them to get more reps, I guess. That's the word that comes to my mind from sports and things like that, where, you know, it may be more difficult to get the number of instances to practice. Having a simulator would give them additional experience that may be valuable. So when they could go back in real life, they certainly have that, but they may feel more comfortable by going through more iterations of practice with the simulator before they get to that point.
Yeah, just because I saw the cost on it, and I thought, wow, more computers, but you know, how many students are going to be affected by this compared to how many students we could purchase computers for, you know, when you start to look at stuff like that. So my question was whether or not we could lease something like this, or if so, what's the warranty factor? How long are we going to have it for, so that if something happens to it, which, you know, things break down,
Sure.
will we be able to, you know, not have a loss that we wasted all that money? Because that's what, 67,000 or something like that?
Did I hear you say this is going to be, we're going to try to get this reimbursed through CARES though, right?
Yes.
Is this something that we can look at, if we're going to get that reimbursement through CARES, go ahead and buy an extended warranty of 5 years and also get that reimbursement for the warranty?
I'm sure that it could, I mean, it would certainly qualify as part of the purchase. Like, I apologize, I don't know the specifics of any warranty, but it's something we can look into. Or, you know, the market, I don't know what the market for these things are, if you maintain them for, what's the appropriate term, Mr. Bass? It's under you guys, right? The discarding, the
The life
reselling.
cycle?
Yeah, I mean, to recoup the cost if we needed to sell it. We'll
So-
find out.
Yeah, I would like to see us try to go through CARES and get the extended warranty, the max of what the depreciation would be on something like that, you know?
Again, did we look into a lease? Because if this is a temporary fix for a need, and it's a need for how many students, you know, I'm looking at ratio of money to students, is how many students are going to be affected by this versus how many students could be affected with CARES money going towards technology or something like that.
Well, and how do you justify or how do you put a price on the CNA or the nursing programs that we have?
Right.
And, I mean, so that's a whole nother part of this conversation that we haven't even delved into. And as far as the hospital's concerned, there are a lot of different protocols that are changing because of COVID, and they will not necessarily see a change back. Masks may not continue in our schools, but access to hospitals, as far as I understand, may continue to be limited. So, you know, we have a thriving nursing program, and I think it's to the benefit of our community that we have that.
No, I'm not saying it isn't. What I'm saying is, have we looked into this? Because this is a huge cost.
Well, I mean, huge is subjective, right? I mean, you have to have some perspective on that, too.
And subjectively, I think it's a huge cost. So what I'm saying is, have we looked into the lease versus purchase? And is it possible to lease one?
I don't have the answer to that, but we can look into that. But I guess we have to do it pretty quickly because we're bringing it tonight, so.
So Thursday, we'll get that information
Yeah, I'm sorry,
and follow
I'm
up.
surprising with that, but I just thought of that as you were bringing it
No,
forward.
I
Because
think
I'm thinking
that's-
if it's a temporary fix, then should we purchase something like this? And if so, if we purchase it, could we get a warranty for it to be used for longer?
the warranty is something we can obviously look into after tonight's meeting and then execute that as we do that. I think this is specifically funds designated for the vocational area, which allows us to provide that opportunity moving forward. I would agree that the opportunity to return in those clinical partnerships is probably significantly further away than any of us would like. So to
I'm
have the
sure.
opportunity to reinforce a very complex process I think it is a value add now because it affords the opportunity for students to continue to get the credentials that are required, while at the same time reinforce that in years to come, while at the same time ensuring that we're maximizing the limited dollars that we have.
And the reason why I ask that is just because in education, I have seen, after I've been in education long enough to see where we buy something very expensive, for example, remember laser discs. You know, we had the laser disc players, everybody said, oh my gosh, this is new technology, we have to buy it, they were very expensive, we used them maybe 6 months to a year. And then they included these big heavy pieces of equipment, and then it's all garbage. So I just, and this isn't per se that.
Right.
But my point is, we have to be good stewards of money.
Absolutely.
And CARES Act money is taxpayer money.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And that's it, Madam Chair. Unless, I'll look into it and send it right now.
All right, so Mr. Bass will follow up with his 2 items.
Yeah, first item is item H, review of the SSAT assessment and review of agreement for access code systems at various schools. Kind of talking in a format here that is not too public, but we went over these items at the closed session on 8/25. Are there any questions about any of this?
Just for the sake of new board members joining us and for the community in general, because that executive session is closed, could you give an overview, or Dr. Moore, could you give an overview of who attends those meetings and the purpose of them and the purpose of the FSAT as well?
Through the chair. Yes, ma'am. Those meetings, because they are sensitive, because we were talking about the security at our facilities and the security measures taken to keep our students safe, at those meetings would be board members, district staff who have vital roles in the safety and security of our staff and students, and additionally, law enforcement is also present.
Thank you. And the purpose of the FSAT reporting?
That goes through, through the chair, that goes through the questions and surveys and protocols that are laid out specifically by DOE to ensure that we are meeting all the requirements that they put forth in Safe Schools Acts.
And all of the districts participate in this process?
Yes, ma'am. All 67 districts participate. All schools that are Florida public schools, whether it be public schools or public charters, do participate in this program.
Thank you.
All right, my next item is the review of the 2021 through 25 five-year capital improvement plan. As we discussed at board briefings and briefly overview, the five-year capital plan is our district work plan, and it prioritizes the facilities that we see need to be addressed in the coming 5 years. This will go hand in hand with the DOE work plan that is required to be approved and submitted by October 1 each year. We will be bringing both the capital plan and the DOE work plan to the September 22nd meeting, but we wanted to get the capital plan out to you today to discuss and go over in case there are some issues or concerns or redirection there. Areas that the capital plan covers, and the capital plan, we're driven to follow statute and the what I used to call the red book that drives you and how you can spend dollars. A lot of people don't understand that in education, particularly public education, we have categorical funding, and just because we have X amount of dollars in our fund balance or in our total budget does not mean we can always spend that money on what we want to. So the guidance for capital dollars you can spend on new construction, remodeling, renovation, maintenance, technology, security, vehicle purchases, FF&E, which would be furniture, fixtures, and equipment, safety to life, which also includes fire alarm systems, land acquisition, which we do not have anything in our capital plan for, but that is also a permissible use, architectural services, and reoccurring capital maintenance needs. The revenue sources that are identified in our capital plan is the millage or property tax, state fuel tax, PICO, which is Public Educational Capital Outlay, CO and DS, which is Capital Outlay Debt Services, interest that we draw off of our accounts that we have, particularly SBA, and I believe Florida Prime is another one, impact fees, grants, and within that revenue string, also, we have allocation for the charter amount. The highlights of our capital plan, I want to point out the major projects that are in the upcoming year's capital plan. Major projects over $500,000. We have fire alarm updates throughout the district, which is a budgeted amount of $600,000. Security enhancements, a budget amount of $938,000, and that will go toward improving schools, making them safe, particularly some of the access controls that we've already talked about. Additionally, addressing entrances to some of our schools that are in need of a security enhancement there. Gifford Middle School, the cow wall replacement at $1.4 million. Mr. Westenberger is here, and he did a very good job in providing you description of those cow walls. And Nick, I'm going to try to get it right, but in Gifford Middle School, you have got skylights. Those skylights are failing, and we need to replace those. So it's an estimated cost of $1.4 million. And then we have 2 exterior painting projects, Oslo Middle, exterior painting at $540,000, and Sebastian River High School at $1.4 million. Those are our major projects that we have scheduled for this current year. I think it's a good practice at this point in time to open it up for discussion if you had anything that jumps out at you instead of going line by line.
Okay, I have some questions, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have 2 that jumped out at me. White fleet replacement. We've talked about this and the need for new vehicles. My question is, $200,000 this year, then 2 years later, then 2 years later. How many vehicles can you purchase with that money? And how many vehicles do we already have? You know, to me, that seemed like a lot to do every 2 years.
The 200,000, so if you think about it, if we're talking about a utility truck, that's going to run, 50,000 if you get a service model truck.
So how many of those do we need to replace in the next year and 2 and 3 years?
The cycle, I can't tell you exactly on the cycle, but Nick, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, it just seemed high to me because we've talked before about the old vehicles like that people get in the cars and they run around. And to me, 200,000 buys you a couple of cars.
Right, right. Now, one thing though to keep in mind, and this is a practice that I've used, just because we have that budgeted does not mean we're going to spend it all.
I know.
And
But if it's
so
there,
Yeah,
if
that's
there-
what I'm afraid of.
if
Some
there-
people say if the money's there, it's mine to
well,
spend.
that's not my philosophy. No. But my philosophy is save it as much as we can. Okay.
And then my other one was, well, I had one quick question, but another one is like, for example, at Glendale. That was a big item that you're talking about, the cafeteria expansion renovation. That school is very similar to several other schools in our district. Have the other schools had cafeteria renovations recently, or is that one just happened to be falling apart more than the others?
This one
Let
has-
Mr. Westenberg come up and address
this
that.
one has been in the plan for about 4 years.
But my
Like-
question is,
Yes,
the other
it-
schools that are like it, have they
it-
also had renovations? Okay.
We did Fellsmere not too long ago when we did the wing addition out at Fellsmere. Glendale has had a persistent problem there in terms of they have quite a few students there, and they're serving lunch for a good period of the day. So that was identified probably 3 to 4 years ago at least by the principal at that time, saying, hey, we need some help. We got a lot of students that we're running through, and we're having lunch all day long. So it's one that we identified. So to answer your question, yes, we have done it
How
at
about
other campuses.
Osceola? That's
Osceola
similar.
we did as well, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about, well, Sebastian's not as big, not as many kids.
We did not do, Pelican Island, they did a little bit of a remodel in there, but that was years and years ago
Okay.
before I was
Beachland
there.
got a nice one.
Yeah,
Sorry?
just because I know that
Yeah,
that's
Beachland.
very similar to the floor plans in the other schools. So I was just curious why that one school was here.
Citrus
Okay.
Elementary we did as well.
Okay,
So,
yes.
yeah,
I know that.
there have been, we've been picking along.
Okay,
And also with Glendale, just the number of, the volume of students has really drastically increased over the last 3 years, even to the point that they've had to add several of the additional buildings out back to accommodate the growth in that school, so.
especially now with COVID having to spread the kids out, I get that.
Mm-hmm.
The other last one I had was a comment about technology. So with this technology, this is under capital funding. So will millage be included in that? It's separate? How does that work?
I will defer to Mr. Fagan there on the millage.
Chair, to the chair, do you mean the critical millage, the operating millage?
Yes.
No, ma'am. Most all this funding sources for all these projects is coming out of your 1.5 mils capital funding source.
Okay. So that, the millage technology funds, those are separate monies that we're going to spend separately on top of what's here.
Yes, ma'am.
I just
That's-
want to, I figured that, but I want to make sure that that's very clear and we're being transparent about
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, this was a budgeted amount. We had some discussions, and they said, hey, we need some money for technology, so we put some money for technology in there.
And if it's there, we'll spend it, right?
I believe Mr.
As
McDonald will
noted by our
spend
previous
it.
conversation, we need to.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We have, is
I
that
have
it,
a question
Mrs.
for Mr. Westenberger.
Rosario has questions? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Westenberger, we talked about the repainting of of some of the campuses. I've been talking about Oslo in particular. There are many that need repainting and beautification. There's a lot of our schools need a completely new redo in terms of curb appeal. The marquees are one of those items that I think on many of the campuses just need a total new, a new marquee, new picture. You know, you walk in, you want to see something that is actually appealing to the eye and draws you into the school. But apart from that, what we talked about was that repainting of schools really serves as general maintenance, a need for a school in terms of the general maintenance. I do see that on in the plan, I do see Oslo Middle and Gifford Middle. I see Dodgertown. I see Sebastian River High School, all on the plan for painting, waterproofing, and some other cosmetic needs here, or general maintenance needs, paving, sidewalks, district-wide. Can you talk a little bit about why it's important for us to upkeep these, not just, you know, for the look of it? And also, can you give a report as to where we are in terms of our marquees?
Yeah, so first of all, the painting, like you said, it is more than just aesthetics. It is waterproofing. It is to prolong the life of the building. So when we go through and do the painting, we do caulking, we do other measures like that to make sure that the envelope of the building is secure. So while it does look good and it appeals to the eye, it also has another function besides just that. So we are trying to systematically go around the district now and identify areas that we need to paint, and it has been an issue. We know that. We need to do that. We need to paint. We need to make sure that we have HVAC systems that are properly functioning. We need to make sure that we have lift stations that are properly functioning. So those are all the kind of the items that when we put it in the capital 5-year plan, they don't have a lot of curb appeal. Those are things that people, you know, sometimes think, oh, what are we getting out of this? Well, we're making sure that the schools are functioning for the students. So, you know, from my side of the house here, Dr. Moore is very involved with the education of it. From my side, it's making sure that the kids have a safe environment to go sit in while they're getting the education. So those are the things that we kind of go through. When we go through this capital 5-year plan, we have a committee of people. It's not just me dreaming up this stuff. I work with the maintenance department. We go out for needs assessments with the principals each year, and we determine needs, some things that they have that they want, and then also what we see from a maintenance side that we need to address. So that's kind of the way we develop these things. The marquee signs we still have, and I can't off the top of my head give you the exact figure, but I'm going to say probably 5 to 6 schools that we have not placed digital marquee signs at. I do still want to do those. I think those are an important feature. But at the end of the day, when I need to determine between air conditioning or a marquee sign, that's kind of where we're at. So as we can get through deeper into this plan, we will definitely try to put those marquee signs back in there, because I agree. I think they're a good feature for the schools.
Thank you. Yes, of course, we have to work down our priority list and make sure that those needs that are priority need to get addressed first. But thank you for addressing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I do have a couple questions. The first question is for Mr. Westenberger. The cow walls at Gifford, $1.4 million is an enormous amount of money. And one of the concerns with that product is the fact that because of the weather here in the sun, it deteriorates, that plastic or whatever that whatever that substance is. It's plastic, is that right? Is it a type of modified plastic?
Yeah.
So we're replacing it with the same thing?
No, we're
Okay.
replacing it with a different product, same kind of look to it,
Okay.
not necessarily the same product.
And
And
what's
that
the-
product has evolved a lot since what was put in at Gifford years and years ago, so.
Yeah, and that was my question, really, there's the life expectancy of the new
Yeah.
product and
Yeah,
general.
and, we're doing it, we want to still try to keep the natural lighting that coming into the school and things like that. So, but the product that we're using, we feel is going to give us a better lifetime than what's currently on there. And again, that was ages ago when
Right,
those
no, I
things
do
were put on
understand
there.
that, it is a significant amount of money, and because the
Yeah.
product itself had broken down to the point of not being, needing to be replaced, I wanted to ask
Yeah.
if there was a different option. My next question is for Mr. Bass. The Treasure Coast Technical Center and the kitchen renovation, you and I had some conversations regarding that, and the funding of that through capital versus the funding of that through some of the other ways that the Technical Center can fund projects. Can you just discuss a little bit and give me some clarity on that?
Through the chair, Technical Coast, TCTC, has got,
Treasure Coast Technical College.
has got a jobs growth grant, and they are looking to spend about $250,000 of that job growth grant toward the culinary program, and then the district capital could pick up the rest.
Okay, so I have a concern about that in general because it does serve a small amount of students. A smaller amount of students, $650,000 or $400,000 is a significant amount of money in our capital plan. So just a question regarding the funding of that and if there are any other different things, including grants through the state, because there had been some grants we had gone out for in the work program through the state. When Governor Scott had a program, I know Mrs. Zork had actively participated in that. I'm sorry.
That's part of what the funding is he's talking about with that 250.
Right, the jobs program, and I understand that. Are there other avenues and ways to be able to fund certain specific program needs, such as something like that?
Through the chair, we can definitely look at that. Perkins dollars is one possibility. That'll be something I'll need to get with Ms. Shields and Mr. Fagan and work through to see where other funding sources could be
Sure.
at.
And as we, as board members, look at different needs that schools have regarding safety and security, part of our job is helping to prioritize some of those things. And when we, as a board, are held accountable for the safety and security of, and I know that's of the utmost of importance to the leadership in the district as well, a kitchen renovation at $400,000 is hard to justify if we're not, if for some reason we would be having some needs in other areas regarding safety and security that are not being addressed because of a lack of funding. So that's always going to be a question I ask, and in this case, I'm going to ask that the district really take a hard look at that.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I do have a couple of questions. The $500,000 renovation that we're going to approve for the Sebastian River High School bathrooms, is that coming out of last year's budget? Because it seems like that would be coming out of this one, and I'm not seeing it on here. It was last year's. Okay, so we're,
And
okay.
and through the chair, I'm assuming that bids came back after the fiscal year was up, and money was earmarked for it.
Well, that's good. Another question is, now that we're in COVID, because life has changed, have we budgeted and do we know and taken inventory of any of the schools that still say that in order for us to be a safe environment, we would like to request the plexiglass or anything like that? Have we taken an inventory from a capital standpoint to see what our schools need to be a safe environment right now? And the only one, I'm thinking about the plexiglass right now, going forward into this next capital budget.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That is a great question. It's something I've thought about also. I mean, as we progress through this, I mean, we're just really 3 weeks into the school year. And as we move forward and depending upon how COVID or the situation evolves, something we definitely need to look at, because if it's something that we're looking at being long-term, which hopefully it isn't, we probably are going to need to address and beef up just particularly those things that you said, the plexiglass, the shields and so forth. You know, again, going through this plan and hearing some of the priorities, you know, we can move things around. I mean, and obviously not detract from where we need to address, but we've got some flexibility, and that'll be something we'll look at to do.
So I would, and I don't mean to add some more tasks
No,
to
no.
your already busy job, but, you know, us knowing as a board, looking ahead at our capital 5-year plan, we know this year there's certain priorities, just like whenever Marjorie Stoneman Douglas took place, we had to shift our, you know, some of our capital project priorities and adjust to those times. And I feel like we're at a situation where we might have to look at what are those safety needs that we hadn't even been thinking about that we need to be looking at now. And another area that it's been brought to my attention by my 3rd grade granddaughter is the fact that we need, because of COVID, we have a separation now with the classes on the playground situation. So now she's complaining, this is from a 3rd grader, that certain students get the playground equipment and she gets the field. So as we look ahead and we're looking at COVID, you know, yes, we know that play and that time for our kids to have that release, you know, outside and just let those stresses go. You know, are we looking at enhancing our playground equipment for those students? Because there's only a small portion of students that actually can have access to that now.
There is a line item in there for playground equipment, but also what you're telling me that there probably needs to be some procedural changes at schools, which I will jump on tomorrow with principals. But yes, there is playground money there also. It's on the last page.
Yeah, it's
Total district playground.
350. It's playground equipment. But when I look at that, I don't know, is that a lag time into it actually getting done over the next summer and not actually getting done this summer, or not this year? Whenever this
The-
the kids
I
are
think
still
that
in?
there's always a lag time when it comes to
Yeah.
your capital plan. I think
Okay.
the immediate response is to ensure that we have a nice rotation in our elementary schools where all have equal access to clean playground equipment. And that's the response, Mr.
Well,
Gass
just
is-
keep in mind, the resource come from a 3rd grader,
I
so
know,
you'll
I know.
have to check the validity to the entire what you're saying.
Mrs. Orr.
Yes.
No, I'm going to second that. That's been, I think, something that we've dealt with across schools, and, you know, there's no funding, direct funding for playground equipment, so it becomes difficult, because at schools that don't have PTA support, sometimes PTA will buy additional playground equipment. You know, they don't get playground equipment, and so, or don't have the same, there's no equity in it. Or it's not equitable, excuse me. But I think Mrs. Zork's point is good. We have been bombarded in our inbox with different products and services being offered to us as far as safety and security, or safety because of COVID are concerned. And I think as a board member, I'd like to be assured that all decisions that we make regarding funding are in line with science and data, and not reactions to perceived safety. And I think Mrs. Zork brings up an excellent point regarding playgrounds and also cafeteria and eating areas. What we've seen across the district is that principals have become very, and Mrs. Barenberg mentioned about Vero Beach High School, very creative in where their students are eating and the way their students are moving on campus. So these assessments were done with schools, or the walkthroughs with schools were done when, Mr. Westenberger? You walk through annually with each principal, am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Usually sometime in the January, February timeframe, we'll meet, myself and Bob
So-
Michael will meet with
Right.
school principals and do what we call their needs assessment.
So what an interesting timing for us during COVID, and I do hope with Mr. Bass working directly with principals that there's a second outreach to look at areas like playgrounds, like cafeterias, and other areas.
Yeah, and just to speak a little bit, a couple of things that I heard as I was sitting over there. The playgrounds, there is $350,000. That's for the district now. So Mr. Michael, the physical plant, He kind of does an assessment of playground equipment, things that need to be repaired, whether we have some unsafe equipment out there, whatever it is. They go through there and do their assessments on that. And then they're also put in a rotation of, we need to get some new playground equipment at X school, whatever that is. So there is that thought process behind it, trying to get that stuff done. I forgot what the other one I was going to say now was.
That's all right, Mrs.
Oh,
Berenborg.
we were talking about the shields and things like that. I believe we can achieve that if we get into an issue with the health and safety funding. That's a reoccurring maintenance fund. That's, again, Bob Michael going out and doing his health and safety stuff, but I may be able to shift some things around and give him some funding in order to take up for that if we run into issues with whatever it is COVID-related.
Can I bring up something about the playground equipment? Mr. Teskey last year, I believe, I asked him a question about ADA compliant equipment. And how come we only put it when we have a child that absolutely needs it versus trying to buy it as we can so that you never know what day you're going to have a child transfer in that has a need, that all of a sudden you have to scramble and go get equipment. Now that, just because that child moved there on a Tuesday, they don't have the same accessibility to equipment that all the other kids have. So maybe moving forward, I've asked in the past, could we look at that ahead of time instead of being reactive, being proactive?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
With us looking at coming to the end of the 9 weeks, and we're gonna resurvey our parents and see how many, feel safe allowing their students to come back into our buildings. We know it's gonna add to the population, and so that's why I'm thinking, we need to get a little bit busy on this plexiglass, because if we're adding a student here and a student there, we know that we need a little bit more, based on what we're hearing now, that does add the safety that's needed, and plus, I could go on about something else about the mask, but I'm not. So that's why I wanted to bring up the plexiglass.
Okay. I have a comment about plexiglass. I thought the same thing because I have asked you about some plexiglass at some of the schools when you first enter. The poor person has one piece and parents are leaning around and talking to them. Well, that doesn't help, does it? The other concern I've had, though, about plexiglass is I've seen where other districts have put it into the classrooms with the kids. The problem with that is cleaning it, and is that really the best use of your dollars? Because I've heard that actually can do the opposite of what you think it's going to help with. So I think before just throwing it in there, we need to really look at the research behind it, because the research is constantly changing on this stuff.
Well, I agree with that, but we do have situations where we are hearing that students absolutely cannot wear, based on whatever reason, they
Right.
can't wear the mask. And having, go ahead and fund some of those stations and get them into the schools that need them. And I'm assuming they're not cheap. So just I just want to see a survey and see what our principals and what you all come up with, what you think we still need. And that's the type of information that I'm looking for. But I do want to say something about Nick, is that I've been here, for going on 4 years, and Nick has been outstanding. And he's done great work, and I'm very proud of, being able to work with you, Nick, and that, I can always rely on when I go to you to get information. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And through the chair, we are meeting with the principals tomorrow. And one of the topics for the afternoon is begin our conversation around our readiness for a possible return for our transitional students, which would include, do you have the resources and materials to enhance your numbers? Now, of course, we can't predict the reality, as we know in this situation, but at some point, we will have a nice return of students, whether it be at the end of this 9 weeks or later in the year, yet really to be determined based on the reality. My desire is to get as many students back into brick and mortar as possible when it is safe and secure. But we begin that conversation in assessing what we've done within the first 12 days of school as of tomorrow, and what additional materials and resources we would need to enhance the volume of students in our particular spaces.
Good, thank you. Is that it?
That is it, Madam Chair. We don't have any others, so a lot of hefty items, but very good dialogue, and I appreciate the opportunity to present these items to you all.
All right, so we'll be back at 5:01.
5:01. All right, thank you very much.
Meeting's adjourned.